Welcome everybody to the Research to Practice Transit Symposium. Today is our second day of the symposium. This symposium is hosted by California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, the University of Florida Transportation Institute, the T-Score University Transportation Center, the American Public Transportation Association, or APTA, and MTI, the Mineta Transportation Institute, based at San Jose State University. You can find the program for today's event at the event website, found here. For your convenience, we've also posted it here. We will start with our plenary session, but their speakers Arndt Betzner, a transit strategist, a member of the Board of Directors, Mobility Genossenschaft, and Mary Leary from FTA, with our moderator, Greg Newmark. That will be followed by a break, and then at 1:15 Eastern, we'll start again with a session on electrification and emissions reduction. I will be moderating that session. We'll have another break until 2:15 Eastern, which time we'll return for a session on transit resiliency, dealing with cybersecurity threats and wildfire evacuations. That will be moderated by Stuart Morey from Caltrans. And then this will end with a session at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on public health and transit, and I will be moderating that session. Thank you again to our sponsors, Caltrans, APTA, University of Florida Transportation Institute, the T-Score University Transportation Center, and the Mineta Transportation Institute. Thank you to our steering committee, Andy Ferrillo, Wendy Moran, Art Gazzetti, Dave Carroll, David Harris, Louisa Easter, Greg Newmark, Jacob Yan, Jesus Gomez, Carrie Watkins, Lily Eleftheriadou, Stuart Morey, Balwinder Tarlock, Shilei Zhao, Hillary Nixon, and me, Chad Riding. Thank you to all of our participants, Arndt Betzner, Mary Leary, John Koos, Brad Menil, Justine Chow, Yachun Chow, Jan Trujillo, Mark J. Talbot, Shilei Zhao, Andrew Kroom, Jody Godfrey, Linda Hill, Stuart Morey, and Andy Ferrillo. For those of you who are members of the American Institute for Certified Planners, this session and the entire symposium is available for professional development. You can find this and more details on how to sign up for the AICP Certification Maintenance Program at planning.org. And you can search for Symposium, and that should bring up this event. If you are experiencing any technical issues, or if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to email me, Chad Riding, the symposium coordinator, at chad.riding@dot.ca.gov. Thank you very much, and we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Greg Newmark.
Thanks, Chad. I am excited to be a part of the symposium for its third year, and to participate in this really important discussion of transit research practice. We have, it seems like, a slight change in schedule for this first session. Arndt Betzner, our initial speaker, is in transit, which we knew about, and appears to be not able to join us right away. So Mary Leary, our second speaker, has kindly agreed to speak first. So I'm going to do a quick introduction and let the speakers go. So Mary Leary is the Deputy Associate Administrator of the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, Office of Research, Demonstration, and Innovation. She leads a group of transportation specialists, engineers, and a data scientist who work on FTA's Public Transportation Innovation Research Program, overseeing the operational activities of the office and providing strategic support to the Associate Administrator, Karina Ricks. FTA's research mission is to enable a robust public transportation network that connects communities and protects the environment. And as a transit researcher, I am a big fan of course, what they do. Mary has held various managerial positions at the FTA, including serving as the Deputy Associate Administrator for TRI since August 2017. Among other degrees, Mary holds a PhD from George Mason University in public policy with a concentration in organizational informatics and a master's certificate in gerontology from GMU's College of Nursing and Health Sciences. We are thrilled to have you here, and thank you for flexibility in going out of order. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Greg, and hi, everybody. I'm sharing my screen now. Make sure we go into slideshare mode. And first of all, I just want to thank the conference organizers for this opportunity today to talk with you all. It's very exciting. I'm trying to make sure that I also see. Okay. So one of the things that we like to talk about at FTA is we're actually an innovation investor. We are managing a portfolio of around $150 million of active research projects on any particular year. And for this discussion, I'm going to focus on one of those areas, and that is mobility innovation. And interestingly, when we look at research to practice in mobility innovation, we started back around 2015 or so with an active program, Mobility on Demand Sandbox. That was about 11 projects, $8 million. Fast forward to today, we're spending almost $43 million total in major mobility innovation projects. But even more interestingly, we've tracked the level of transit agency and FTA recipient use of non-research funds to fund solutions that we've actually researched and done innovation activities on using public transportation innovation funds. That now is up to over 400 different projects for about $270 million. So we're really excited about that. And I think that shows just how innovative transit agencies are right now. It's such a transformative time. It's been amazing to work with so many recipients that are doing interesting work. And our goal is to make sure that we're not only funding these interesting programs, but that we're also doing a good job getting the word out. So hopefully you'll be able to see that as I go through here. Right now that should go through. Right, there we go. The outline for the presentation, it's primarily, I want to, first of all, always ground in the U.S. Department of Transportation strategic goals. And in FTA, we have a new strategic plan. Then we're going to talk about and just hit the highlights for mobility innovation, transit automation, and cashless and integrated fare payment. Those are the three areas that we've been researching for a while now. And then I want to talk about some of our research to practice activities, an initiative called AIMNet that is being managed by Shared Use Mobility Center for us as our technical assistance partner. And then a new initiative that CalSTART is our partner with, and I'll share that, and then we'll close with discussions. So first of all, FTA vision. We want a better quality of life for all built on public transportation excellence. And I've got a picture there that shows a bus. It shows people getting onto the bus. It shows a bicyclist taking a bike off. And, this is the vision of transportation writ large, micromobility, transit, pathways, et cetera. And our mission is to improve America's communities through public transportation. I've got a picture here of a streetcar. It's a really pretty one. It's red with white top, and then kind of yellow rimmed windows and doors. So the U.S. Department of Transportation has important strategic goals. First and foremost, always safety. We want to make sure that the nation's transportation system is as safe as possible. Then economic strength and global competitiveness. I mentioned that we're an innovation investor. And when you look at the billions of dollars that we spend in the Department of Transportation writ large, that equates to a tremendous amount of opportunity for expanding the strength of American-based businesses as well. And then hopefully global competitiveness. And we do a very active program to share best practices from the United States to colleagues all around the world, but also too, we love to learn from our colleagues around the world as well on things that we can do in the United States, learning from their best practices. Equity, very important, huge focus on that under the administration. We're making a lot of good progress in it. Climate and sustainability, of course. Our goal in public transit is to be carbon neutral by 2050. And then transformation, and that's a broad goal that really encompasses the power of disruptive technologies. And I use that very deliberately. That term was coined many years ago. But disruption is not a negative thing. Disruption oftentimes brings lower price points, opportunities for new customers, expanding the customer base, and doing things differently, and sometimes in ways that one couldn't have imagined some time ago. And FDA strategic goals. This is hot off the press, 5-year new plan, enhancing safety, building resiliency. So, it was just tragic what happened in Florida. And just across the board, we want to make sure that we find ways to help transit agencies really weather very difficult, events, increasing sustainability in the long run, improving equity, of course, and then connecting communities. A lot of what we do on the mobility innovation side and transformation, which is where we put a lot of that work, transformation and equity, is underneath what we call the connected communities. So our mobility innovation research, it's constantly evolving. And it was very interesting during the COVID pandemic. It provided us an opportunity, I think, in many ways, to escalate things that were already going on, but make it go faster. And what we've been trying to do is look at the concept of what do we need to do to really empower the traveler. There are new travel patterns that people have. Transit agencies are trying to figure out what are those new travel patterns. Do those new travel patterns mean appropriate changes to some of the current schedules that they have? Do they want to move to more on-demand versus fixed route services? And then what type of tools do we need to do? And climate considerations are important. How can we incentivize and provide opportunities for people to be able to use climate neutral ways of moving? A lot of times you hear the word first mile, last mile. I always like to say second mile, first and last second mile, because oftentimes, if you've got access to a bicycle and really safe pathways, you might be able to jump on that, and that even reduces, carbon even further. So, and as we go forward, we're really looking at addressing what types of tools can transit agencies use. It's pretty interesting. Some agencies and some of our programs are looking at the use of artificial intelligence as an example, and with de-identified cell phone data to see where that demand is changing. And it's fascinating to see where we're going. So I wanted to start with where it kind of began. I mean, the reality of it is mobility on demand within the Federal Transit Administration built upon years of work that had been done across DOT, both in FTA and our Joint Program Office. There was something called Mobility Services for All Americans that I got involved in actually when I was at the Department of Health and Human Services many years ago on the United We Ride program. And we learned a lot from that program. As a matter of fact, probably some of our recipients perhaps were early folks involved with Mobility Services for All Americans project. But that really helped us move forward into this new world. And these are our current initiatives related to mobility innovation, and they focus around equity primarily. I'm not going to go through all of the words on here. I do have a picture, and it's showing somebody with holding a smartphone and looking at what is representative of applications, information about schedules, information about micromobility options, et cetera. Shows also a safe pathway walking across the street. We also have folks focused heavily on rural communities. In the beginning, I think a lot of our projects were in large areas, large urban areas, but we've been very deliberate, particularly the last few years, to make sure that we're bringing in rural communities, because what is innovative to one organization, it might not be innovative to another. And each transit system is unique and different. We also have been doing a lot of work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, on integrated payments. And then I think many of you saw, I hope, the Mobility and Security Notice of Funding opportunity that recently closed. That's our brand new program. And so there on the right, there's the 5 programs that we have: the Mobility on Demand, Integrated Mobility Innovation, Accelerating Mobility Innovation, Enhancing Mobility Innovation, which, by the way, was specifically requested by Congress because they liked the program so much, they really wanted to see us invest a little bit more. So we were able to do that, and we announced those awardees. And what I'm going to do now is just hit some examples, just very short. I'm not going to go through everything that's on the slides, but I did want to highlight some of our recipients and the great work that they're doing. I would definitely refer you to our website. We do have information on all of the projects that are currently in process, but this is one. It was LA Metro. working with VIA on a first to last mile. It also had an integration with transportation network companies. I mean, one of the things that we've been looking at for a while is there's power in integration with the private sector. Oftentimes, the private sector has been a partner with transit agencies, and with the expansion with transportation network companies, along with taxis who've been longstanding partners, there are opportunities for perhaps increasing accessible transportation for people with disabilities. That's a very important area. And maybe having more on-demand services in areas where maybe we have flex routes, et cetera. So they have already been able to have some additional trips. They've been able to reduce wait times. We're really excited about that. That's completed now as a sandbox project. So integrated mobility innovation. And by the way, with integrated mobility innovation and accelerating mobility innovation, the three areas of focus for those are pretty much the same. It was either mobility on demand, transit automation, or integrated mobile payments. In this particular case, and a lot of them had a very close connection to increasing accessibility and improving transportation for people with disabilities and older adults particularly. So in this one, we had that. The program is looking at a BRT, they're looking at platooning and precision docking, and we're pretty excited about what this could do for accessibility for the community in Connecticut. The city of Wilson, North Carolina, we're just spotlighting this one, and they were expanding on-demand services and microtransit through public-private partnerships in rural communities. And this was also a partnership with VIA. And as a part of that, they have microtransit services that were replacing some of the city's fixed route bus and on-demand transit systems. And as I said, that is an area that we're seeing a number of transit agencies looking at as the travel demands have changed with the rise of telework. And it looks like at least hybrid telework is going to be a new way that many organizations will be working for the future, but we still have many different occupations where, critical occupations where people need to go to work, but it might not be 9 to 5. It might, and also might be in areas that we have perhaps not always had transportation services available. So that's a really important area for us to look at. So where are we going next? Well, where we're going next, and we use the word next, trying to be a little creative there. And I've got just kind of a descriptive graphic that shows bicyclists, scooters, automated cars, and just kind of the vision of these new pathways. It's got fare boxes, it's got a smartphone, but we see that there's a whole next generation that we want to look at based on what we've learned with the 43 million we've invested so far. And there's really going to be three areas we're drilling down into. And one is data tools. We need to have some common mobility data exchange standards. I think we've made a lot of progress there as an industry, but we've had a lot of feedback from across the board that says, hey, FTA, it might be helpful if you could help us with that area. So we're not sure exactly where we'll land with it, but we know we need to do some additional work. And as a part of that we really hope that we'll do a lot of partnerships with companies, both public and private, as we go forward. A lot of transit agencies have done some very creative things in their own areas. So how do we link that all together and make it easy to share information? I've been involved with big data for a very long time in the private sector before I went into the public sector. And one of the things I always like to say is it's easy to talk about data integration. It's not so easy to do it. So we want to make it easier. And then smart operations, and that term smart, it really refers to all the ways in which we can empower and make things easier and flexible using technology, digital infrastructure, expansion of digital infrastructure, modeling and simulation. These present opportunities for us to reinvent, but also maybe assess in a modeling and simulation way, what are the potential benefits before we actually go into a large scale implementation. I think that's going to be pretty interesting. And also, we've been working on making travelers smarter, having information at their fingertips through their smartphones. But there's a huge focus right now on the rider experience and how to improve that. And we want to be able to learn from that going forward. And, down at DART, as an example, I was on a panel with Greg Ellsborg, who is the Chief Innovation Officer there. And it's interesting, they had an app for providing information to their travelers for ride options, and they added some additional links on there so that they could get real-time information about rider satisfaction. And if the rider had a satisfaction concern or a concern that with their particular trip, they can actually catalog that. And so there's real-time learning that we have the potential to do as we evolve. Pretty exciting. So the next area I want to talk about, and just again hit briefly, is looking at transit automation. We've done a lot of work in there. I mean, the bottom line in terms of where we are with transit automation is it will be a long time, we think, before we're not going to have drivers in vehicles. But we do see opportunities for automation to make things safer. So in a bus, as an example, we have a current NOFO for advanced driver assistance systems that will make it safer for the bus operator, but we do not foresee not having a bus operator. I want to be really clear on that. And then, we might have, little shuttles, but those are small areas, dedicated areas that we didn't have public transit services before. So, and then a lot of the promise of this is where we can go with accessibility, but that's going to take us a while. Right now, the second area we're also looking at is in maintenance yards. Automating, moving the buses around in a maintenance yard so it can be safer for people from a cleaning perspective, and also safer in terms of not hitting pillars or anything like that. So this just gives you a sense, we're not only funding projects ourselves, but we're also trying to learn from active projects that are going on all around the country. So one of the ways our automated transit team is working is trying to learn from everyone. And so this is just a composite of a set of projects that are going on. It's not certainly comprehensive and doesn't include everything. So this is just one example of an area where it was an on-demand shared ride use case. The project is complete. This happened down in the city of Arlington, Texas. This is kind of what they were striving to do. There's an accessibility component to it, and we're pretty excited about what they've been able to achieve. We have done a number of listening sessions. There is Star Plan 2.0 that is coming out. And if you're interested in our vision around strategic transit automation, please take a look at the first plan. We had very good feedback on that. And as a matter of fact, we've done a lot of what we said we would do in that plan. Now it's time for us to look out into the future. We were at listening sessions in conferences. We did an official RFI. We're right now then pulling all that information and developing a new strategic plan, which we kind of consider 2.0. This is just a subset of the vast amount of resources we have available. It's on our website, all downloadable. But these are studies that we've been able to do on transit automation. There's an internal business case for transit agencies if they wanted to take a look at it, insurance and liability. We did an accessibility scan. So I really recommend, if you have some interest, please take a look at some of these studies. And the last area I wanted to focus on before I get into research and practice is we're doing a lot in assessing multimodal contactless integrated payment. I know that's a mouthful. Don't want to say that 5 times too quickly, but this is just a group of some of the recipients that we're working with today. And interestingly, there's a lot of potential here, we think, for assessing what is the viability of a national network of integrated payment. What might that look like? So as we look out into the future, this is something that we hear from a lot of people when we go around, and we go to and try to be very visible at a lot of conferences. I just got back from App to Transform. It was great. And so looking forward, we want to see what we can learn, but we're still very much, I would say, in the formative stages. No big things to report yet. Here is just spotlighting one of the projects that we have. And this was funded out of a project that we did for COVID-19. And we're looking at what the Minnesota DOT is going to be doing. So kind of sort of start to close out. We have a project called AIMNet. That's an accessible transit technical assistance activity. What we're trying to do is build capacity, accelerate adoption, facilitate research to practice. A lot going on there. We're doing this in ways that bring together not only our recipients, but also others that are doing work in this area. We have open meetings, and part of that is we're doing peer exchanges. This is just an example of some of the peer exchanges that are happening in some of the topic areas. There's a meeting that's coming up soon for another peer exchange. And the last thing I wanted to mention, we're very excited about this, is it's it's good to want to do a really good job in research to practice, but one way you do that is you ask the industry. And so we're asking the industry, hey, what are the ways that you like to consume information? We know from FTA's surveys that our recipients tell us that they use our website a lot across the board to gather information about FTA's programs. But we're trying to see if we can drill down a little bit deeper, and then we'll put in place those methodologies, those research to practice methods and activities that will ensure that when we have good news, we share that good news, and also help transit agencies actually then implement that good news to improve operations, to improve the traveler's experience, and to really ensure integration of data. So those are the things I wanted to share. Let me stop sharing my screen. Hopefully I'll do this right. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Greg if there are any questions.
Mary, thank you so much. I was thrilled to get updated on all of these cool things that FTA is doing. Um, uh, and before I open up to questions, I just want to say that we did hear from Arn, and due to a health condition in his family, he will not be joining us today. So that opens up more space, for questions for Mary. And Chad, maybe you can remind me, excuse me, participants who are watching online, are they able to offer, I'll kick off the questions, but can they offer questions in the comments that we can then relay to Mary?
So yes, so any kind of questions can come to me. I received a few yesterday. Normally people could offer comments on the YouTube comment section, but I think for some obvious reasons we've disabled that to keep it civil here. But what I can do is I can relay any questions that come to the chat box.
Okay, so I will go with the questions that we already have. And Mary, you've given hints on this first question, but if you could go into more detail, and also provide maybe some guidance on FTA's vision. We have a question: what is the FTA doing to help transit agencies roll out new technologies, specifically, with payment modernization, driver assistance and app-based microtransit? You mentioned all of those. But I wonder if you go into more detail about, specifics to help our users, in the field, or perhaps maybe like just some sense of where the FTA wants to go on those items.
Yeah, I would say that there are a couple of ways that we're doing that. First of all, the AIMNet program, which is relatively recent. It's only been around, I think, for about, maybe 3 years now. But we try to, in that, have ways that transit agencies can just talk to each other. A lot of times what we do is try to match up transit agencies, so you've got that peer-to-peer opportunity. We also work very closely, so you've got the National Center for Mobility Management, we've got other technical assistance centers that are close partners with us in a lot of the work that we do, and then the National Aging Disability Transportation Center, and then you've got NCAT that helps with advanced technology implementation for smaller agencies and rural agencies, and then you've got National RTAP. So I wanted to mention those technical assistance centers because we all work closely together. We try to share information. I'd love to have a more targeted program like Everyday Counts that the Federal Highway has, and one of the things we are looking at right now is where can FTA and the Federal Highway Administration partner from an Everyday Counts perspective. We're going to be targeting other areas initially. There's a new program, Advanced Digital Construction Management Systems, that is in the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's going to be the first thing that we look at. But one of the things we can do is match people up, and then also making sure that we've got good information not only on our website, but we also have other repositories with our partners. So that's the current way that we do it. And part of that is statutory. Most of our funding from the Public Transportation Innovation Program has to go towards research projects. They either have to be research, they have to be innovative development, or demonstration evaluation. Technical assistance is actually out of a different area, and that's why the technical assistance centers are so important.
Great. Well, building on that, Chad shared a question with me, which is, with the research program, where do you see the FTA's program going over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, it's definitely going to go with where the FTA strategic goals are, kind of going back to that. when we look at those strategic goals, safety, when we go outside of mobility innovation, some of the other areas we've always done a lot of work in. So first of all, safety. We've got the safety research demonstration program. On resiliency, we've had a resiliency program for quite a while. And then on the infrastructure side, we have something called real-time asset management that's in process. And it's interesting. It's one of our smaller demonstration programs, but I think it's small but mighty. It's looking at things like sensors and cameras and digital twinning to be able to assess, the state of good repair of heavy rail systems primarily. So there's a lot that we're doing there, and we're going to continue to build on that. Writ large, one of the exciting changes in the bipartisan infrastructure law is that it's giving us the opportunity to take two centers that we've had in place for a while. One is at Auburn University, one is at Ohio State University. And these are low or no emission component testing centers. And obviously today, with the billions of dollars that we're spending to try to help transit agencies transition to zero emission technologies, particularly, there's a lot that we have to look at. Battery safety is one of them. And looking at what are the risk factors for triggering a thermal event? How do we mitigate those risk factors? And so those two centers, which before were very kind of narrowly targeted for a program where manufacturers of low or no components could voluntarily go to those centers and have at a 50% match testing done. It turned out that there wasn't a lot of demand for that, but now those centers are research centers, and we can do what's called directed research on advanced technology. So, many people might be familiar with the $90 million that we invested from the early days, from the Obama administration, and then going forward. And that actually helped to catalyze battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell buses. And so we have a chance to kind of build on that. So we think that there will be an opportunity for some new investment in advanced vehicle technologies, and not only with those two centers, but we're looking at how do we perhaps build out, another national FTA laboratory center concept, partnering as much as possible where that is already in place, and then looking at if there are areas where we need to actually do something ourselves, and then going a little bit further on equity. One of the areas we really will drill down on very closely on the Mobility Next program is how do we address equity? And not just on the research side, but FTA is looking at that in a broader construct. There are a lot of other programs that we fund outside of research that are looking at a lot of these areas. So that's really kind of where we're going: climate, safety, continuing to invest in mobility, and above all, trying to help transit agencies as they transform and continue to expand ridership, which has been very exciting to see. Ridership is expanding. But when we talk about disruption, I mentioned that concept. One of the key concepts about disruptive innovations is they bring in new customers. And a lot of people don't quite realize that, but if you look at the studies that Christensen did, and his initial books on innovation, he talks a lot about that. And I think that's still true for transit today. And look at what's happening with micromobility and how micromobility has now connected in to public transportation. And then we've got this opportunity for multimodal access. There's a lot of I think, incredible paradigm changing. I know an overused word, but I think it's really true. Transit is going to look very, very different years from now than it does today, and only in a very positive way. And hopefully we can get areas that don't have transit access. So connecting rural communities, and I think that's going to be really important.
That is a very thrilling vision. I'm excited to at the university end of this and as a transit consumer to be to hear the vision and to be a part of it. There is a question that we had earlier, and it touches, I think, on this question of future change and future disruption, which is there are some concerns about automation in transit, given that one of the biggest, generally like the biggest cost of transit is the labor, followed by fuel. And with automation, will that be job eliminating, and could that create, tensions, and how does the FDA kind of see a potentially transitioning workforce? And as you said, this is certainly, deepish into the future, but what strategies are being bounced around at the FTA?
Well, I really appreciate this question because it gives me the chance to highlight what we're doing in workforce development, which is a huge area of focus for us. We've got the new Transit Workforce Center that is hosted by the International Transportation Learning Center. And one of the great things about ITLC, and they've been a longstanding partner with us for many years on workforce development projects, they have a very strong focus on labor and management and relationships with both. And they leverage that into the work of the Transit Workforce Center. They actually have a recruitment campaign going on right now that transit agencies can download materials. We do not see, and I tried to allude to that before, but it's very important to us that as transit agencies, and it is to the agencies as well, I mean, transit agencies are facing record challenges in terms of being able to recruit, all the bus operators they need today. We do not see bus operators losing their jobs, not in any way, shape, or form. What we do see is we see opportunities for bus operators to have new tools to make it safer for them. I mean, years ago, I remember we had an amazing briefing by the labor unions. They came in and talked about the workstation and the challenges for bus operators in the way the current workstations are. Challenges in visibility, challenges in 1G force when they hit a bump, challenges in the ventilation in the buses that causes them to breathe fumes sometimes. And then also we're very concerned about the uptick in assaults. And we're doing a lot to try to address that. So I want to be really clear that as we embark on testing around transit automation, we see this as a complementary activity in support of the continued expansion of current transit workforce and expanded transit workforce. We think there are going to be new opportunities for people who are really interested in technology. I talked about digital infrastructure. We're going to have a lot of employees coming in on that. We have the shift that's going on right now for technicians and engineers who have been working on, let's say, hybrid or CNG or diesel buses, and then moving and working on battery electric and fuel cell. I think that's a really exciting opportunity for them. And we're looking at what type of training has to be done for these frontline workers. So, and for those of you familiar with the transition plans that are required when people bid on the recent, and we awarded, I think, $1.6 billion for low and no emission buses, there's a requirement to spend up to 5% of that for workforce activities to ensure that we don't displace any workers, to ensure that we have training so that for folks who want to, that they can have that opportunity. So I hope that's really clear, but no, absolutely. We see labor as an important partner as we go out into the future together, and I know the transit agencies do as well. And we'll do this together, and we'll do it in ways that will benefit public transit employees, not hurt them.
Thank you. I mean, I do think also kind of touching back on some of the earlier points you made that automation will open up lots of extend the reach of transit in areas that are not well serviced right now, and I live in a rural area, essentially rural, and where the people that need transit, really need it, but it is very tough to serve. So automation, hopefully will offer some cool new ways for people to age in place and for rural areas to remain intact and yet not be so dependent on driving. There was a question that was passed along that I'd like to share, and I'm always curious about this as well. From your perspective, there are many research projects funded by the federal government as well as state governments and nonprofits and other things. What to you are common characteristics of successful research projects? Because I want to make sure I hand those in to you. So tell me more.
Okay. That's a tough question. Let me see if I can give some thoughts on that. And the other one thing I do want to say is we really like working with our academic partners and the other centers all around the country. So hopefully you guys can always help us constantly be looking at this. So I think first and foremost, we need to do a good job when we envision a project. When I talked about that 150 million, mostly about 70% of the funding that we put out for demonstration programs. So if you kind of contrast that to the Transportation Cooperative Research Program hosted by the National Academies, a program that we love, we really balance each other. We strive not to duplicate efforts, but oftentimes they are exploring something new, and the way in which Congress created our statute, we actually have to build upon initial assessments of a solution to see whether there's any viability there. Then we have to look at innovative development for that particular solution. Then we demonstrate it. So a lot of times it's work that the universities are doing in public transit. It's work that the Transit Cooperative Research Program is doing that then helps identify areas of greater need that we can then put bigger funding pots on, 5, 10, 15, $20 million research programs. And so I'm going to focus on the demonstration programs primarily. So first of all, we have to scope it well. Second, and we've had a lot of problems with this, by the way, so I'll just share it with everyone. So if you ever envision sending an application to us with one of our demonstration programs, or you're a recipient, we've had situations where partnerships break down and there isn't enough early agreements between the partners, so that we've had situations where we haven't been able to continue on with a recipient because they've lost a partner or two. So I would say effective memorandums of understanding, effective understanding on what the partners are going to do, identifying the right partners up front. That is really, really important. The second one is in this world today, one of the things I'm really excited about that I've been able to champion in the Office of Research is we did not have a data analytics capability. And we now have one. It took a while to get somebody on board and to get the program going, but we have a fantastic data scientist who actually is now my acting deputy. I mean, I've been the acting associate administrator for almost a year and a half, and then I stepped back into that role about 4 months ago or so. And so David Schneider is now the data scientist, but he's now transitioned into the acting, deputy associate administrator. And that's really important because when research is done, there is a requirement, it's a federal requirement, that other than those organizations that have a waiver, so National Academies has a waiver, but everybody else, if you spend even a penny on federal research, you have to ensure that you provide public data access so that other researchers can do secondary and tertiary research. And from my PhD days, I remember how that could be really helpful if you're trying to look at a certain area. You can go back and look at the studies by experts in the field and then see where else you can move it along based on the information that they already have. And so I think having a good plan for your data, having a good way that you're going to manage your data, and having a good evaluation strategy, I think is also very, very important. And then we do ask our recipients to be active partners in research to practice. So I say that's the other thing. And lastly, something that we're going to try to be better at, and it's a concept that it's in the private sector a lot, and that is fail fast. And I don't want to scare anybody by saying that, but you know what? Sometimes, as you know, it might take us a while to launch a particular area of inquiry. And what we want to be able to do is, if current events have obviated the need for that, and maybe we should move our money elsewhere, then we're going to do that. So the one thing I would say is move your projects quickly. We do have challenges sometimes with believe it or not, we make awards and then it takes more than 6 months for us to get an application in and for the project to start. So that's something that we're actually scrutinizing now, and you're now seeing language in our NOFOs that require applications for recipients who we want to award to. They have to get their statement of work and their application in within usually 60 days. So those are the things that we've seen. But I also would say, please, mary.leary@dot.gov if you've got any ideas on things that you see that we could do better as it relates to that question. Love to hear it.
Thank you. Yeah. The contracting, I think, is, from the university perspective, it is a real issue that, when we try to schedule, say, students and other things, that if we, the potentially long lead time for contracting makes it, tough if we want to ensure, funding. And I've certainly, experienced that. So I'm happy to hear the FDA is, working on that. I guess on that note, and this maybe should be the last question, there's a question about what are some of the main challenges you see in transit research. And I think we could take that into the specific questions that need to be researched, or it could be what are the struggles for getting research out. And one twist I just want to add to that is that, you're mentioning a lot of partners with, say, TNC companies like VIA. And I do think that as an academic, it's tough to, since I don't, have this capacity of, offering, having lots of experience with, being an operator, it's sometimes tough to participate in research projects where still the outside perspective of an academic can be useful. So considering like, as you think about the research challenges, what are the roles for the different potential players that are involved? And I think this will be the final question. So thank you.
Sure. So if for those of you who did read our Mobility and Security Notice of Funding Opportunity, that's a new approach. If you saw, we were looking for an integrator. We were looking for an organization that would take that project from the very beginning to the end. And some of the skill sets we were looking for is an organization that understands, reliable, valid research. A lot of the research that we do, just by its very nature, right? In our world, it's case study based. And it's very hard to then take that, if we think of it academically, we don't have stratified sampling, we don't have a national sampling strategy, we don't have, randomized controlled sampling. So we can't really make certain types of statements. And sometimes we might want to do that. So a role that the academic community has, first of all, is evaluation, data gathering, structure for assessing, the validity of research. And maybe sometimes we can do something that is similar to kind of where I came from originally. So I was in the private sector for 20 years, and then I started at the Department of Health and Human Services, and worked with CDC on some of the projects they were doing for older adults and aging in place. So that whole way of having research that we can then replicate it and also note how it applies kind of across the board is something we're kind of interested in. And then program evaluation, we work very closely with the Center for Urban Transportation Research to put together a tiered strategy for program evaluation. It's something that's built upon the Office of Management and Budget perspectives around performance measures, and there's something called the Evidence-Based Act. So there's a lot of importance now placed on ensuring that federal research dollars are well assessed in terms of their outcomes. And so that's where, again, we can work with the academic community. I happen to love logic models. Oftentimes when I say that, people just, their eyes glaze over and go, oh my gosh. But they're a map, right? You've got your inputs, your outputs, your impacts. And, in the long run, we need to be able to talk about what we achieved with what we invested. And that's where we've been spending a lot of time and energy. First of all, we start with what is the business problem to solve, or what is the opportunity that new technology is giving us. Then we look at potential solutions, we research it, and then we assess the viabilities of those solutions, and we want to be able to do that better in an evaluative way. So I hope that answers the question. There's so many places I could go with that, but since you asked for more on the academic side, and having been in that world myself and done studies too, I think there's a lot of ways that academia can help us.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. We are coming up on the kind of the end of the hour, and I there is kind of one lingering question I kind of want to ask, but I kind of suggest the last one. Well, somebody asked also about the future of automated transit research. So, what's the current state and where is it going? And since you had mentioned in your presentation, do you want to give some just final thoughts there? And then that will truly be the last question, and I'll turn it back over to Chad.
I think I mentioned it before. It's really two areas right now: automated driver assistance systems and maintenance yard. And we have a notice of funding opportunity that's out. So I'm going to refer people to that. And then obviously, since it's a current notice of funding opportunity, I'm not going to say anymore.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Mary, thank you so much also for doing double duty. You were only scheduled for, a half the session, and you rocked it out, and we were very grateful. So I really appreciate
pleasure. Thank you.
Your being here, everything, and Chad, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate your staying extra, Mary. Being flexible like that, really appreciate it so much. So we're finishing a few minutes before our break time, but we are going to go ahead and go on break. Welcome back, everybody, to the Research to Practice Transit Symposium. We have an exciting session for us today. We have with us, we are going to speak about electrification and emissions reduction and strategies towards that end. And so for that purpose, you can find in our program, we have, and I'm going to go through the listing here. In our program, we have John Coos from the San Joaquin Regional Transit District, or RTD. John Coos has been with RTD for 19 years. He oversees the maintenance of 5 facilities with 213,000 combined square feet, 800 bus stops, 13 60 kilowatt hour depot chargers, 4 500 kilowatt rapid overhead chargers, a 500 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system, and in October, you will have completed 711 kilowatt hour photovoltaic solar energy system. So a very impressive organization you have there at Regional Transit District. Very impressive credentials such as a Firefighter 1 certificate, emergency medical technician, transit paratransit management certificate program. So he seems like if you're ever trapped on a desert island, he has the skills to help you survive. Next up, we have Brad Menil also from RTD. He is a maintenance and operations supervisor. Brad has over 29 years of experience at RTD, where he is currently a maintenance and operations supervisor. Prior to RTD, Brad was an aircraft maintenance mechanic with the U.S. Navy. Brad also serves as an aircraft maintenance mechanic in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. He has a degree in business administration and management from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So welcome, Brad. Then we have joining us Justine Chow, who is a senior project manager of Southern California Edison's e-mobility operations. She is responsible for leading Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Transport program, which aims to install charging infrastructure to support nearly 9,000 medium and heavy-duty electric vehicles. Justine joined Southern California Edison in July 2019 as part of the Management Leadership Development Program, where she spent 2 years rotating through different areas, including trading and market operations, e-mobility operations, transmission and distribution, and regulatory affairs. She has a master's in business administration from University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business, and has a bachelor's of arts degree in politics and economics from NYU. Previously, she worked at Bloomberg New Energy Finance in New York City, where she managed a portfolio of transportation, government, nonprofit, and corporate clients in the Americas region. Next up, we have Ya-Chun Chow, who is a manager of the California Air Resources Board. Ya-Chun is a member of the Zero Energy Truck and Bus section at the California Air Resources Board. So in this capacity, she has been working with zero emissions technology in the heavy-duty vehicle sector, which would include buses. Currently, Ya-Chun's team is responsible for the implementation of the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation, which would help bring all of California's buses to zero emission by 2030, or at least new purchases by 2030. Ya-Chun has a PhD in Environmental Science and Policy from the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and a Bachelor's of Science in Marine Environment from the National Sun Yat-sen University in Taiwan. Finally, we have Dan Trujillo, who is the Director of Transit for El Dorado National Bus Builders. In this position, Dan is able to provide and educate public and private fleet managers about zero-emission vehicles and technology. Dan is passionate about the current transition from fossil fuel-powered fleets to battery and hydrogen fuel cell systems. Dan lives outside of Boise, Idaho, but would call himself a Southern California native after growing up in Los Angeles County and graduating from Whittier College. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to start it off with some general questions. So what efforts do your organization have towards transit electrification? And I'm going to start it off with John and Brad. What are RTD doing for electrification?
So I'll start. So, currently right now we have approximately, I believe it's 17, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, 17 battery electric buses. I think there's another 9 Gilligs on the way. As you heard earlier, we have about 13 depot chargers, anywhere from 60 kilowatts to 62 kilowatts. And then, they're paired, so you can get 125 kilowatts out of that. We also have some overhead chargers, and as you stated earlier, Chad, we're early adopters and kind of pioneers for the battery electric charge, if you will. Brad, you got anything you want to add? You're on mute.
There you go. Sorry about that. In keeping with the battery electric theme, we, on the maintenance side, it's just analysis, constantly comparing what the battery electrics are doing to our hybrid fleet and our legacy diesel buses, continuing workforce development in those areas as well. That's about it lately. As John said, we were early adopters. We started out this back in 2012. And we've progressed quite a bit since then.
Excellent. So really some of the pioneers, as you said, in bringing battery electric vehicles to a California transit agency. Now, Yachu, and a lot of the reason that California is able to bring all of our transit fleet to be electric, at least the purchase of all new vehicles will be electric by 2030, is because of agencies like San Joaquin Regional Transit District that have been able to show that it's possible to do that. What is Air Resources Board doing toward creating a clean vehicle fleet for transit in California?
Chad, thanks a lot for the opportunity. So I do want to say that California Air Resources Board really part of the entire California's effort. So in addition to the innovative clean transit regulation, which is actually the very first zero emission heavy duty vehicle regulation in California and also in the United States. Of course, the regulation couldn't really move forward without the progressive and the pioneer transit agencies like San Joaquin RTD. But also California realizes that the transition is not as simple as we switch from flip phone to smartphone. It really requires the entire community to pull all the resources together. So state of California also has provided a lot of support, especially in the state legislature, such as the recently signed into law AB 2622 that extended the exemption on the sales tax through 2026, and also HB 350 that allows electrical utilities to provide fundings to transit agencies that want to go with the battery electric bus route. And also AB 841 also kind of requires IOUs to pay for a lot of infrastructure cost. But also here at the ARB, we are also kind of responsible for a lot of the program implementation details. We currently have set aside for vehicle funding that is under the very famous HVIP program. We also have redoubled our interagency collaboration on funding streamlining and also stacking possibility. In addition, we had also put out some research projects to better understand electrical charging and hydrogen fueling standardization to see what other areas that we can further enhance to make sure that we continue to have technology improvement, and also to make sure that yesterday's investment does not become tomorrow's stranded asset. In addition to that, we also conducted a program readiness to make sure that when we enter into the purchase requirement stage, that transit agencies are not adversely impacted. When it comes to infrastructure, which is kind of a very, very huge area for to have zero emission vehicles, we also enhanced our collaboration among various state agencies, such as with Caltrans, the Energy Commission, and also the Public Utility Commission, and also with the utilities. In addition to that, ARB has also conducted significant outreach effort to team up with California Transit Association and also California Association for Coordinated Transportation, also CALACT. So we believe that all efforts together can help transit agencies move forward, but we also understand that there's a lot more that we have to continue to do. We have to continue to pour resources in.
Thanks, Yachun. You make some really good points about the funding issue. I know here at Caltrans, we spend a lot of time working with local agencies on grants for zero emission vehicles, and that's a big push of California state government right now to make it financially feasible. Switching to the one aspect that you mentioned was the electrical providers, so the utilities companies. So one of the major utilities companies here in California is Southern California Edison, which provides power to over 20 million people in Southern California. And so, Justine, I'm wondering what kinds of things are Southern California Edison starting to do to overcome this challenge, or to meet the moment in transit vehicle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chad, and really great to be here with everybody today. Just before I answer that question, I do just need to make one comment about my remarks, kind of in accordance with our ex parte rules here. So I'm not intending to discuss any topics that are pending in an open proceeding before the commission, and I'm not aware of any decision makers from such proceeding here today. But if anyone is in attendance this morning that considers any of my remarks related to a pending matter in an open rate setting proceeding in which that person's a decision maker, please do let me know after this session, just so that we can take the appropriate steps to comply with those ex parte reporting rules. Now, turning back to your question, which I think is a really great one, I think my fellow panelists have already made some really important comments. I think as the largest contributor to greenhouse gases in California, the transportation industry and really in particular medium and heavy duty vehicles have a vital role to play in improving air quality and really helping the state achieve its goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. I think to some of the earlier comments, we definitely recognize that the electrification of big trucks and transit buses is really key to realizing that clean energy future, and that we at the utility, in particular SCE, has a very important role in ensuring that the infrastructure is in place to support this transition. And so, I think one area that I really want to focus on today is the program that you mentioned I'm leading, Charge Ready Transport, which was designed to really help accelerate the adoption of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles in Southern California, which definitely includes transit buses. And the program really aims to address some of the key cost and the complexity barriers that are associated with installing charging infrastructure, particularly for our fleet customers. And what I mean by that more specifically, maybe for those who are less familiar with Charge Ready Transport, is that we will cover, the costs associated with distribution infrastructure upgrades on both the utility side of the meter and the customer side of the meter, for any of our fleet customers that are procuring medium and heavy duty trucks and buses. And within that program, there is a specific carve out for transit agencies. So at least 15% of our infrastructure budget will go towards transit agency infrastructure deployments. And we're really aiming to ensure that that type of support is available for this very important segment. So I'll pause there, but happy to dive into more of those specifics as we move on.
Absolutely, yes. So Dan, you're representing the purely private side, the Eldorado ENC, Eldorado Bus Company. You're really focused a lot on, you work with basically all of these parties intensely, in terms of procuring the buses, with the regulations, making sure that, there's conformability within all of the power and charging requirements. How is Eldorado Bus Company meeting those challenges?
Yeah, I think what we do is we look at someone like Brad and John, and we say, what are your visions for rolling out zero emissions? I think as a bus provider, you become an educator as well. So if you look at maybe Brad and John's experience with Proterra on their BEB, and they kind of broke through relatively early, and they come up with that learning curve of, we don't think this is going to work for us, or we think it will in a different situation. So they'll turn to Eldorado or another provider and say, tell us, what your fuel cell bus can do. We're going to figure out how to fuel it by offering, an RFP or consultant work to folks that can bring a hydrogen fuel station to their property. So I think as a back end, as a bus builder, we have to partner with Brad and John, and then also the partner of the energy, right? It's SCE, it's a charger company, or it's it's hydrogen with the various players in the marketplace. I think what folks like Brad and John have a challenge to do is to say, we'd really like to see that price of hydrogen come down. When are we going to reach that point where 2-3 years from now, it's a 1-to-1 trade with a fuel cell bus versus a CNG or diesel bus? On the electric side, there's some trepidation of, look, if there's a brownout, if the grid goes down, if electric prices continue to soar, what do we do? So I think the challenges that face, San Joaquin, just like anybody else in the business, are very viable. You have large agencies that maybe were enamored with electric buses, and they say, wait, can we really plug 3,000 buses in at night and have them be charged the next day? So I think as a provider, not just for ENC, but I think for being in the business, you tell Brad and John, hey, this is what we've seen. How can we direct you in the right area to make sure your team is educated, be it with safety, be it with vendors that we approve or trust? A lot of folks with like SCE Charge Ready program, that would be my first thing to say, get on these calls, educate yourself, but also with safety issues and making sure, you have all those facets covered. I think it just allows transit agencies to be a little open-minded that in the beginning, 6 years ago, it was all electric. Now we have different propulsions, we have different fueling, and I think there's a combination of both. But as a bus builder, we want to say, Brad, John, what do you know now and where can I direct you? Even at New Flyer, without naming a name, we would say, we don't believe this company is going to have your back when it comes to charging infrastructure. And as an advisor, why don't you look at these 4 instead? And SCE definitely is not one of those. We really like what SCE is doing, but just by being honest with our customer base of saying, look, let's look at this route, so it's easier, so it's more affordable, and it takes open-minded folks like San Joaquin or anybody else to say, we think you're right, let's use different methods. So even if I don't gain the order on the ENC side, let's say Brad and John go with New Flyer, the fact is, since they're tipping their toe in, they can say, look, we only bought 5, ENC, what do you have? And then also the bigger project that I see, Chad, is the fact that as an educator, even if they don't buy from ENC, they're still cleaning up the air. So I've done my work to at least help educate him, even if we don't win the quote. I think there's a bigger idea behind it all. We can't be selfish and say, hey, look, I didn't win, Brad, John, take a hike. I think I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to tell you what's new in the industry, and let's clean up the communities. If you don't have that, as your motivator, you're in the wrong business. So that's kind of what I like to do, is educate more than sell. And if we win, we win.
Absolutely. No, and you really brought up a lot of the challenges and the opportunities that agencies have in purchasing electric vehicles. And I kind of want to touch upon those challenges, because I think how they've been overcome can provide some important lessons to agencies, especially because this is a research to practice. So we're researching what solutions are from a practical and a research perspective, and then implementing them and hopefully disseminating those lessons learned. And you really brought that up, Dan. So I kind of want to bring that up to the group. What kinds of challenges have you seen and experienced in, meeting this new market? Definitely a new venture than your traditional power providing or your traditional fueling of either diesel or compressed natural gas vehicles. So maybe start it off with Regional Transit District. What kind of challenges have you faced and how have you overcome them?
I would say, on our side, a lot of the challenges were familiarity, service development, planning, more in the operation side than necessarily the maintenance and facility side. It required a lot of teamwork between interdepartmental staffs. There was a lot of communication that we missed. That, as we look back upon the last 8 to 10 years, that we could have done better. But a lot of the challenges had to do with just the new technology and how we implemented it. Workforce development was another big factor. Fortunately, we were already in the high voltage area because we had, adopted hybrid technology back in 2004. So we were kind of ahead of the curve on that when it came to maintaining the vehicles. Our facilities department was a little bit behind on that, but that's probably where it came into our greatest degree of difficulty. We had a lot of challenges. There weren't the usual interagency communication that we were used to. I couldn't, call AC Transit at the time and say, hey, what are you guys doing for this or that? It was just really us and Foothill Transit at the time that had these battery electric buses. So we did a lot of talk with Foothill and a lot of collaboration on what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that is, we're also experiencing obsolete parts, being early adopters. Some of the early technology is no longer supported. That goes for infrastructure and bus side. And the, I guess, ever-changing technology for the infrastructure side. In transit, nothing happens tomorrow, especially whenever you're putting infrastructure in. So what we purchase today is not necessarily, I guess, tomorrow's technology, if you will. So trying to keep up with ever-changing technology and infrastructure has also been a challenge.
That's a good point John brought up. When we started, we had 74 kilowatt hour batteries on the buses, and we were, charging every 15 minutes. And, 8 years later, we're up to what, 660 or 880 that's being offered. So, like phones, as Yun-Chun said, the technology is rapidly advancing, and we're trying to find it hard to keep up.
That's actually surprising. I mean, it's not that surprising, but it's a little surprising in that the things would become so obsolete in such a short amount of time. But it does make sense in many ways how fast things are moving. I wanted to move to Justine. So from Southern California Edison's perspective, what kinds of challenges or obstacles have you faced, and how have you kind of worked to overcome them in this environment?
Yeah, so, I think the primary challenge, it's great to hear the comments from my fellow panelists. I think one of the primary challenges we've faced in the medium and heavy duty space, pretty much across the board, has been vehicle availability. And I think, evolving technology to my fellow panelists' comments. But I will say that I think in the transit space, we're a bit further along on some of those efforts. The route cycles are well established, more predictable than maybe what you see in some of the other segments. But I think that for us, one of our challenges that we still face is really in securing both, immediate and long-term electrification plans from transit agencies and other customers. But, I think that can also make predicting and planning for those types of mobile loads a bit of a challenge. At SE, we're working to incorporate known customer projects and that type of information into our planning and forecasting efforts. And we are collaborating with our state agencies to improve forecasts so that our grid is ready for that high electrification future. But we also realize that our transit customers are working, to develop their own plans in accordance with the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, and that there can certainly be external factors regarding funding, and other things like technology that can sometimes make it difficult to inform and develop really solid plans. But to the extent that we can, partner and collaborate with transit agency customers, and other medium and heavy duty customers who are willing to share their transition plans, even if they're still evolving in nature, it can really help, I think, in catalyzing both fleet and utility interactions. It allows us to increase visibility on both sides of the table and really provide better information so that we can reduce our uncertainties in planning and make sure that we're ready to meet the capacity and the needs as they materialize on the system.
Absolutely. I really like how you say the reduce uncertainties in planning, because as I'm sure Daniel, well, anybody would know, but I know in the private and the quasi-private sphere, those uncertainties are very difficult for businesses. And having to deal with those, businesses typically want as predictable an environment as possible so that they can make, business plans, supply chain decisions for 5-10 years from now. I want to switch to Yachun, and because this, I think, deals with this, is as a regulatory/funding agency, with these kinds of changing environments, how do you deal with these challenges that you face in terms of electrification and emissions reduction, and how have you overcome these?
So I think it's very important to first of all us identify what the real challenges are, and also so we can identify where the opportunities are. And I think my fellow panelists John, Brad, and Justin had also kind of talk about some of the things, but in general, we basically look at administrative side of challenges. We also look at technological side of challenges. The administrative side of challenges would include the funding, the financial resources, workforce training, infrastructure resiliency, and also fuel cost management. A lot of transit, when they're kind of getting into a new technology, there it might be a little bit overwhelming because it's a new technology and it is very different from traditional, okay, we'll just procure a bus. Now we have to kind of procure a bus that's suitable for our operation. We also have to procure infrastructure that can be in place when the bus is delivered. But let's not forget about that we also have to have a fuel cost management. So ARB has also kind of put a lot of effort trying to share the fuel cost management techniques. And we previously had contracted National Renewable Energy Laboratory to study Foothill Transit Agency's fuel cost. I think I'm very confident to say that nowadays Foothill might be the best example about managing fuel cost. A lot of people say that, okay, when there's no demand charge, we're going to save money. This might be a little bit misunderstanding, because I think there is an opportunity to avoid unnecessary cost. But if we look at the Foothills data, we know that they have been in 3 very different fuel, the electricity rate structures since 2013 or 2014. And they have been able to manage the fuel cost $1 per mile or $1 per kilowatt hour at the same cost. Not because they're lucky, but really because they putting a lot of effort into manage their fuel cost. So in addition to that, we also kind of work with the transit agencies to put out some of the regional collaboration approach as much as possible, because sometimes people can really learn from each other, and sometimes if people can if transit agencies within the same region, they have a similar uh, infrastructure, they can also support each other, or maybe they can diversify their portfolio in terms of if there's a case that transit agencies have to provide emergency response, they are also more prepared. In addition to that, we are also looking at working with the industry to really look at transit buses duty cycle in terms of a range. We realize that when it comes to technological challenges, a transit bus is not just a transit bus. It actually it's a vehicle with a lot of components coming from outside of the bus manufacturer. So very often, for example, ENC, they get to control the bus quality, but they don't really get to control how where the fuel cell stack is developed, or how reliable a battery is. So this kind of coordination is also something that the ARB is working with the entire industry, so that we can have a more reliable product for further improvement. And also transit agencies could kind of make sure that they select the best product for their usage. So we try to provide the information to transit agencies to really look at what's needed, and also don't just rush into the market and pick the first product you see in the market, even though it might be the most affordable product. But in the future, it may not be the most be the most affordable service that you can provide. So it is much of a long-term planning process that we're trying to work with transit agencies about. And I think I'll just pause here.
Okay, thank you, Yachun. Yachun brought up, of course, ENC, so Eldorado National Bus Builders, where Dan works. And so one thing I'm curious, Dan, is the role that ENC plays, and a lot of it seems to be very critical, is as a bus builder to be able to meet all these various standards. So you have make the bus that can work with this particular agency, the charging just right, the type of power and everything. It seems very daunting at times. And so I'm wondering, there's a lot of things you must, keep you up at night. What do you worry about? What are some things that you would like to know? The focus of this symposium is really making that bridge between research to practice. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, Dan, at ENC, what would you like to know? What kinds of things would you like to see research about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I think when you look at agencies, they're more data driven than ever now with zero emission vehicles. Back in the day when we broke in, you had the diesel to CNG conversion, but now a part of a lot of these fundings is to have telematics on board and see how these buses are performing. Is that I think every salesperson's nightmare is getting a call from Brad at midnight saying our bus is broken down and we don't know why. That's the data and the education of learning and teaching and gaining resources to the team. I know Brad and John mentioned AC Transit, where they were one of the first agencies to go into fuel cell with their Van Hools many years ago. So those training centers, either one in Southern California, one in Northern California, that Brad and his team can go to learn, is going to be instrumental. And also, again, back to the telematics side, if someone had battery buses and let's say there's problems with charging, putting enough energy into the bus, you can actually have a printout and say, hey, Justine, look, we're being affected by the rate the charger can charge. But also looking at dual technology at San Joaquin, where they have battery and fuel cell, they now can say which one works better, which one is less temperamental. And I think the first generation of battery buses were more of a political statement of, hey, we're trying to go green. We're not perfect yet, but it'd look great if you'd have some of our buses. And then they start stacking batteries higher. We start at 300 kilowatt. Now we go to 446. Now we're at 727. When is it enough, right? And then we say, hey, time out. You know, it's not about racing for bigger battery packs because you have to charge more. It's more expensive on the energy side. So you'll have folks that'll say, hey, 150 miles or lower, let's do battery, 150 and higher, fuel cell. But to your point, Chad, it's all about education. There's a theory that goes, a salesman gets you in the door, but your service team gets you the next order. So what folks like ENC have to do is to build a service team around the new technology and to say, Brad will be there tomorrow. Let's learn together, because there's this thing I always say is, hey, should we take the 12-year bus warranty? Should we take the 12-year battery pack warranty? And my answer is, we don't have a 12-year-old bus. I can't tell you if that battery is going to last that long. So we still don't have the resources or the knowledge to say, hey, John, spend 145 grand for the battery pack warranty and let's hope you don't have to use it. He might think, well, I hope we do, because that's darn expensive, right? So we still don't have the feedback on how these batteries run down, how long the fuel cells last, all that stuff to be educated. But I think it's up to the bus manufacturers to say, look, we're all in this together. There's plenty of room as we ramp up to zero emission that everyone's probably going to get a piece of that action, and simply say, let's learn from everybody. But what keeps me awake at night is bus failures, because no one's trained in fixing them. And you don't get the training until buses start to fail. And then I think there has to be this forum of Brad and John saying, hey, group, you know, we had a failure and we found out it was this. So I think you're going to have this learning tool that these agencies have to come together and say, if this happens, it might be this, right? And I think that's the theory I like to express, is when we're tipping into new technology, we have to get these forums and these tools to share, and not just browbeat the bus makers or the charger makers, but yeah, you can say, look, the ENC bus, it went down. They're all going to go down. But what did we learn, right? So I think that's what keeps me awake, is making sure there's a service team to back it up.
And that's a very interesting point you make, is that all buses will fail at some point. I mean, if you run buses hours a day for weeks, months on end, of course they're going to need some kind of maintenance. As you said, the service team is being so important. I'm wondering from the electrical charger side, because that's, you know, critical, is to make sure that you can find the optimal charging pattern for buses. And how can you find ways to make that infrastructure optimal for each agency? So what in your perspective, Justine, are some of the things that you would like to know more, and maybe see some more research?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You know, there's a lot of things I think we'd like to know. I think the comments about vehicle and charger compatibility are very important ones on the customer side. You know, right-sizing infrastructure is something that we also are very conscientious about, especially as a ratepayer funded program, making sure that we don't end up overbuilding, or, you know, potentially in a situation where we have stranded assets that don't get utilized. We're very much thinking about these things. And, you know, as a big part of our program, we really work with customers to have these types of conversations with them early, before, you know, we get into the critical design and build aspects of our projects. Having, you know, gone through this a bit with some of our pilots before we launch these programs, and being able to take those learnings forward. But I think these sorts of conversations with the are helpful as well, and opportunities to share these learnings. You know, I think on our side, there were also some comments made about, you know, just having better data about the actual operations. You know, I made some comments earlier about wanting insight into fleet electrification plans. I think that that's still very important information for our teams. You know, we are working on improving our forecasts and engaging with different you know, customers to incorporate their plans into our forecasts. But you know, there's no substitute for hearing from actual fleets, and really having these conversations in real time, so that we can ensure that there's grid capacity that's available when it's needed, and that it's sized appropriately. I think the other item there that I would say is it goes kind of hand in hand once you've got that infrastructure in place. Also having insight into just kind of what some of that usage and those load profiles look like is also very helpful for us in terms of planning. Having better information and insight into situations where charging is being managed and also where it's not being managed, and what that potential load flexibility might look like, and what flexibility there is to potentially minimize grid impacts would be great to see on our end.
Thanks, Justine. Yeah, I know for this area, the transit agencies is where a lot of the bus infrastructure, the critical charging infrastructure is literally where the rubber hits the road. And so I'm wondering from a transit agency's perspective, RTD, how do you deal with all of these unknowns? What are some things that you would like to see researched? And what research would help your agency the most?
For us, I think we were heavily involved in the early research with Yachin and her group at CARB and Foothill Transit. So I could tell you, I'm going to be honest, there was a lot of areas we were hit and miss on. When we first started, and I tell everybody this going forward, make sure you have a meter for every charger that you have versus one for 10, or one you might have missed, so that, because like, Daniel said earlier, data is everything now in electric buses and fuel cell buses. We're gaining so much knowledge through all this data analysis, and having everything metered, having everything on a telematics program is key for that analysis going in the future. Research, something that we found out through research is, having certain leadership maybe from the state prior to jumping into these pilots. A lot of things that we were doing within our own pilot was proprietary, or didn't come with a manual or instructions on how to do things. And maybe if those standardizations were in place prior to, I think that would have helped us out a lot more in the research, data analysis categories. Some of those things, we had to make up on our own. We couldn't get it from the manufacturer or from the charge infrastructure. So those were a lot of things that we missed on the research side when we initially started.
And I think from the infrastructure side, you hear a lot, or now it's starting to actually gain traction, which is the battery energy storage systems, BESS units. One of the issues that we've came across was more resiliency in the event of issues with here in Stockton, California. We do have some concerns with heat advisories, wind advisories, possible power shutdowns. So a little bit more technology or research on the battery energy storage system, BESS units, a little bit more resiliency. And once again, as the whole panelist has mentioned, alluded to, is technology. And the technology comes with data, comes with growth. And all of it at the end is a great partnership with all your stakeholders, whether it be the agency, internal, whether it be your utility company, or your bus build manufacturer or CARB. They're all key players in making success and pretty much stopping the gap.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. And I wanted to hit upon the point that you both made about the research that CARB conducted. In our couple minutes left, I was wondering, Yachun, what are some new areas of research that you'd be very interested in seeing?
So I basically concur what Brad and John said, but in addition, I would like to say that a range increase based on technology innovation is very important. We cannot just simply rely on large battery pack to make the range. we need to reduce the use of depletable natural resources. If we need to have range, the range has to be provided based on renewable resources. In addition, I'm also interested in seeing some battery safety research and certification. Currently, battery safety certification is only made for transportation purposes, but not much has been done for operation and also the day-to-day usage. Especially transit buses really have the most demanding duty cycle among all heavy-duty vehicles. In addition, well, except for the long-haul trucks. So the battery usage is a kind of a key indicator about how reliable and also how safe this transportation could be. The last thing I would like to see more is really the microgrid capacity and enhancement case studies that could really support smaller guys or the rural counties when it's very hard to upgrade their local grid.
Excellent. Well, Dan, Brad, John, Yachun, and Justine, thank you so much for your time today. It was a great discussion about how we can improve the systems that we have for buses, and these partnerships are so critical. And thank you very much for your time today. It was a wonderful discussion. I know I learned a lot.
Cool. I'm glad to be a part of it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
For
you.
having us.
Nice to meet you in
Oh.
person, Brad.
Yeah,
See you, everyone.
guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So we are now going to go on a 15-minute break.
Hello, my name is Stuart Morey, and I'm an Associate Transportation Planner with California Department of Transportation, Division of Research, Innovation, and System Information. I'm pleased to moderate our session today on transit resiliency. Our first speaker is Mark Talbot. Mark is a management executive with EFCT Advisory Services and Cybercase. He brings 25 years of expertise achieving revenue, profit, and business growth in the transportation, government, and financial services sector. Our topic today for Mark is cyber resiliency. Please welcome Mark.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Let me pull up my slide. Well, thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about cyber maturity and resilience in the transit space. It's been something my colleagues and I have focused on for the last several months as we delve deeper into helping agencies understand where they stand and what they can do to be proactive, improving their cyber maturity, as well as their ability to recover from any potential cyber attack. I'll have a brief agenda just to go through a couple decks, and hopefully at the very end we can have some questions after both presenters present their topics. I'll give you an introduction of who we are, some observations and headlines today of security in the transit sector, some industry research my colleagues and I have participated in, the federal mandates and directives that have recently been published. And really the big question that when we talk to potential clients is where to start. And I'll give you some ideas, as well as, in conclusion, some very fundamental basic recommendations. First, let me introduce Cyberbase, founded by 3 former CEOs, and our mission is to enable organizations to manage their cyber maturity and resilience. Scott Belcher is a co-founder and the former CEO of ITS America. Andy Souders is a co-founder and former CEO of All Traffic Solutions. And myself, Mark Talbot, as a co-founder and former CEO of Redflex Holdings, an ITS organization. First, I'll start with security in the transit sector. I thought about trying to figure out a picture as we sat around the table talking about what it's like to be a cybersecurity engineer. And this is what came to mind. This was a recent picture we saw. Many of you probably saw a Tennessee-Alabama game about 2 weeks ago. This was, of course, a post-game victory celebration. And I thought it was pretty apropos to say the event security individual in the blue represents a cybersecurity engineer in an organization, and everyone in orange represents all potential threats to that industry. So I thought it was a pretty elegant representation of how many of the folks that we talk to in the information security sector feels in their organization. A couple of the headlines I think that probably catch most people's eye. Obviously, we have major attacks on infrastructure. These are all recent headlines. One of the consequences of that is rising premiums and more restricted cyber insurance. Mainly people that begin to question whether they should self-insure and even bother signing up for insurance. And then, of course, you're going to have the White House and the government starting to pass down directives, particularly for critical infrastructure, and setting some guidelines instructing agencies how they should spend money towards cyber maturity and resilience. Again, these are some headlines and some actual published events. And this really, I could update this about every week. This is from last year. One example is RIPTA had a ransomware attack, forced to pay 170K ransom, and then subsequently had further investigations based on the release of PII that they found later on after they paid the ransom. So again, it was sort of a poor recovery and has cost them a great deal of money as a result. Another example is VRT, a smaller agency in Boise, also suffered an attack, compromised hundreds of personal records, and they spent a great deal of agency money recovering from that. I think you can see that cyber attacks is not limited to any one segment of the transit space. Large agencies and even small agencies tend to be opportunities for potential threats. And what are the impacts? The practical impacts are risk of interruption of bus and rail schedules. It's not just about personal safety, but also the exposure of personally identifiable information, also known as PII, particularly since so much commerce is going on between rider and agency, particularly in the form of credit card transactions for fare and or bus tickets, and the ability to afford cyber insurance. Many of the agencies, when we began talking to them a year ago, were really unaware of what their cyber insurance actually covered. So they may have this false sense of security without really knowing what exactly they could claim in the case of cyber attack. We'll talk about some of our industry research. Scott Belcher, one of our co-founders, is a researcher for the Mineta Transportation Institute. He's personally authored a number of research papers. I think there is any number of transportation institutions out there that are actually publishing great work. It's worth a read, particularly when it comes to the idea around cybersecurity, what the current state of affairs is, and then also recommendations to improve an agency's profile. Here are some just examples that are out there and available for anybody to consume, and recommend you take a review of these. A couple of things, just some high level data that we pulled from those research papers. When we interviewed about 1,000 particular individuals, and here's some of the data that we found. From public transit agencies, 22% responded they suffered an incident, 22%. When you look at the global organizations and the surveys conducted by any number of researchers on the private sector, 82% over the same period of time felt they suffered a disruptive event. I would say the inconsistency is significant, and I think it ultimately will lead to some conclusions that public transit may not even know when it's under attack or has been attacked. Some of the other outcomes of our questionnaire: 40% do not have a cybersecurity program in place. 43% do not believe they have enough resources necessary for cybersecurity preparedness. Only 50% conduct annual security audits. 60% do not know or do not know how to add clauses into their vendor contracts to flow down risk to their third-party service providers, and 60% do not provide annual cybersecurity training. I think the conclusion from this research is that we were in the transit space woefully behind the private sector in being ready and adequately prepared for an increasing threat of cybersecurity and cyber attacks. There have been a number in the last 24 months of federal mandates and directives. I won't go through all of them, but here's a list of ones you can look up and review. I would say the bulk of these focus mainly on reporting and being able to identify an attack when an attack happens, when a ransom is paid, and basically, in essence, making sure we're transparent as an industry so that others will know what's happening and can be prepared of a potential threat on their particular property. One of the last ones, the TSA Security Directive for Public Transit and Rail, has some very, I think, basic points that I think are worth noting. One, the TSA Security Directive says designate a cybersecurity coordinator. Identify somebody in the organization that you're going to designate as the person responsible and the focal point for cybersecurity. Two, report cybersecurity incidents to CISA. This is the idea of being transparent and creating, in essence, a database and trail of activity so the federal agencies can actually participate and help. Three, develop a cybersecurity incident response plan. This will go a long way to improving the overall resilience of the organization. Understand you will be attacked at some point. How do you respond, and how quickly can you respond? And then four, conduct a cybersecurity vulnerability and assessment each year. I think you need to know where you stand, and then I think each year you need to be planning on how to get a little bit better. That's the greatest level of defense, is being proactive. Where to start? So at Cyberbase, our general outlook is cyber attacks are no longer what we call threats, but they're organizational risk. They're going to occur, and I think you need to anticipate and build the organization and the organization functions around the fact they're going to occur, like any other risk within the organization. Cybersecurity resilience programs are complicated, but they're essential to manage and mitigate an agency's risk. We interviewed more than 50 leaders in transit at Cyberbase, and on top of 100 interviews as part of the MTI research. So I think we have a pretty good feedback on where people stand. We will continue to present at over 10 industry events, and again, getting very good feedback as we continue to elevate the idea of risk and also start directing folks as to what they can do today to make their agency and organizations more mature from a cyber security standpoint, as well as more resilient. One of the tools we've developed is an annual assessment tool called Cyberbase XRM. It's simple, it's intuitive, it's completely driven off the NIST CRR-based assessment. It's in the cloud. It allows you to not only monitor the progress of completing the assessment, but then compare your maturity from one assessment to the next. So the thought process being, you establish where you are at baseline, you determine the areas of risk and greatest area of need, you invest and you begin to improve in those areas, and then you reassess, and you can see your progress in overall maturity rating as you go from quarter to quarter, year to year, depending on the period of assessment. In addition, we offer a guided assessment with cybersecurity experts in some cases where agencies are really starting from a place without any subject matter expertise in-house. The tool is very easy to use. It's a web-based tool. It's, as you can see, very intuitive. It's a self-assessment. It's really meant to be performed and completed by staff and about your organization. And I'd say that in conclusion, the 5 basic recommendations we have after doing our interviews and our research, similar to TSA, identify a person within the organization that's responsible. Really create one focal point of coordination. Conduct a cyber assessment at least annually using a NIST-based tool. It really is important to understand where you are today and how you're improving year over year. Based on the assessment, develop a readiness and response plan. I think resiliency is as important as defense and how you recover. Incorporate cyber monitoring into overall integrated risk management plan. This should be, in essence, as a former CEO, a management level, board level reporting tool. This should pass on to everybody that has a fiduciary responsibility of the organization, understands what their risk exposure is relative to cyber attacks. And again, engage in public and private information sharing programs. This is our greatest defense is a collective defense. So to the extent that we share immediately when we've had an attack and the greater level of details and resolution of that attack, it's better for everyone else that participates. And that's it. Thank you very much. Happy to help. This is my email. If anybody has any follow-ups or interest in hearing more about it, happy to have a conversation.
Thank you, Mark, for that very informative presentation. Our second speaker today is Dr. Jilei Zhao. She is the Director of Smart Equity Resilient Mobility Systems Lab and an Assistant Professor of Civil and Coastal Engineering at the University of Florida Transportation Institute. Her topic today is wildfires and transit resiliency. Please welcome Dr. Zhao.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Stuart. So hello, everyone. So this is Jilei Zhao. So I'm an assistant professor in transportation engineering at the University of Florida. So my research mainly focuses on modeling and planning for large-scale evacuation for wildfires and hurricanes. So today I will talk about transit-based evacuation in disasters. And so these slides are prepared by me and my undergrad research assistant, Anna Forrester. So as you all know, Hurricane Katrina was a destructive Category 5 hurricane that caused over 1,800 fatalities and $125 billion in damage in late August 2005, especially in the city of New Orleans and the surrounding areas. So Marcy Rose of the National Spinal Cord Injury Association testified before Congress in regard to the Katrina disaster. So in her, when she was testifying before the Congress, she mentioned that Susan Daniels called me to enlist my help because her sister-in-law, quadriplegic woman in New Orleans, had been unsuccessfully trying to evacuate to the Superdome for 2 days. It was clear that this woman, Bernalda Cassette, was not being evacuated. I stayed on the phone with Bernalda for the most part of the day. She kept telling me she'd been calling for a ride to the Superdome since Saturday, but despite promises, no one came. The very same paratransit system that people can't rely on in good weather is what was being relied on in the evacuation. I was on the phone with Bernalda when she told me, with panic in her voice, the water is rushing in, and then her phone went dead. We learned 5 days later that she had been found in her apartment dead, floating next to her wheelchair. Bernalda did not have to drown. As you can see from the table here, Two individual studies all found that the majority of the victims from the Hurricane Katrina is from the minority groups with an average age of 69 years old. Transit-based evacuation could have saved many of them if we have a good plan in place. However, more than a decade later, hurricane evacuations are still experiencing system failure. In 2021, so Hurricane Ida impacted Louisiana, especially the New Orleans region again. So only 3 days notice was provided to the Southeast Louisiana before the storm. However, they didn't have the time with Ida to safely call for a mandatory evacuation, where they would be putting over 1 million people on the road at the same time. For a recent event, which is Hurricane Ian, which is a Category 4 storm, just impacted Florida last month. For Ian, we are experiencing a more dire scenario over there. So in Florida alone, there were at least 119 deaths from the storm surge caused by the Hurricane Ian. And according to the news reports, Lee County delayed ordering residents to evacuate with only 24 hours of lead time. Further analysis is still ongoing for what failures contributed to the widespread failure to evacuate for these two recent events. Moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, in the recent years, wildfire has become a growing threat to communities, especially in California. Research has shown that the intensity and the frequency of wildfires have significantly increased, and so does social harm, largely as a result of climate change. Meanwhile, urban and suburban growth has led to the expansion of wildland-urban interface, which is the WUI areas, making more communities vulnerable to wildfire risks. According to Louise Comfort, a researcher from University of Pittsburgh, so during the last 5 years of the consecutive mega fires in California, people have gradually realized that it's not possible to stop those fires. The only solution for us is to get people out of the way. However, mobilizing a response to a wildfire has become increasingly difficult, especially in the rural areas with limited resources during extreme fire events. California does not require a community to have an evacuation plan, and even if one exists, it may not be publicly available. So a 2019 investigation conducted by USA Today Network of California, so they found that only 22% of the highest risk California communities surveyed had accessible sort of evacuation plans. So in order to help us better understand where we are in terms of evacuation planning, so we did a very complete review of the state of the practice. So this is a recent study conducted by my colleague, Dr. John Rennie from the Florida Atlantic University. So he evaluated evacuation plans for carless and vulnerable populations in 50 large cities across the entire United States. As you can see from this table, that 17 cities had no plan available, or even a plan did not exist, including areas in California, for example, like Los Angeles. 20 cities had moderate plans, and 6 cities had weak plans. So the cities that had strong plans, and Jacksonville, Miami, New Orleans, New York, and Philadelphia. So Rennie and Maryoga recommended that these strong plans should be utilized as a model for other cities. And I recently learned that some of the counties in California have started to look at those strong plans and to see how they can adapt some of the plans for their local context and strengthening their evacuation planning for the carless and vulnerable populations over there. In order to help you better develop your plans, so one way for each community to evaluate your evacuation preparedness is to actually adopt a rating system to look at different dimensions. So here is one kind of rating system proposed by Dr. Rennie and his group. So they suggest we should look at 5 different dimensions, including special needs registries, specialized transportation plans for individuals with specific needs, pickup location plan, multimodal evacuation plan, and pedestrian evacuation plan. So by looking at your scores for each dimension over here, you will have a pretty good idea which parts in your community need more work and attention and how you can improve it. Since we just learned that Miami has a very strong plan in the country, so let me just give you an example for Miami-Dade County over here. So Miami-Dade County's Emergency and Evacuation Assistance Program, EEAP, has a registry of those that may need special assistance in evacuations. So those individuals include people who are unable to evacuate on their own to a specialized transportation need, who are homebound residents and unable to walk to a bus pickup point and do not have anyone that can provide transportation, who have medical needs that prevent them from evacuating on their own, who are bedbound patients, who are on life-sustaining medical equipment that require electricity, who require assistance with daily living activities. For all different kinds of vulnerable population groups, you will expect you will need different types of vehicles and facilities to accommodate their needs. So in addition to those current reviews, we also point out the major challenges that we are facing of the current practice, and those challenges can be categorized into 3 areas, including planning, operations, and research. So in terms of planning, so most communities lack emergency evacuation plans, like we just discussed, or only have a basic plan in place. Even those that express having these plans in place, the information is difficult to find and often requires going to multiple different online resources. There is a decent number of multimodal plans and specialized transportation options already in place for most communities in the country. However, there is much less consideration given to the voluntary special needs evacuation plans and pickup location plans. So in terms of operations, so the first thing we are lacking right now is a lack of information on adherence to the plan. How do we the other things we are very lacking right now is the new technologies that can potentially rapidly change and improve the plans. For example, like collaboration with TNCs. Some of the counties are starting to explore those options. However, for most of them, they are not often being adopted. So how do we increase plan adoption and ensure that we are meeting the needs of the communities and the vulnerable populations that require transit assistance during emergency evacuations is something that's of pressing needs for us to address in the near future. Lastly, in terms of research, there is just very limited work on reviewing the current practice and to suggest where are the gaps and how we can improve the practice. And the research on this topic is still very limited. Based on those challenges, so we propose 4 areas for improvement in the future. First, we need to increase research on the efficacy of planning and operations. Then we also suggest that we need to strengthen public partnership and develop target educational campaigns to enhance adoption of emergency evacuation plans. So then we also need to provide more guidance to emergency management officials to achieve a baseline standard for evacuation plans. And lastly, we need to prioritize careless and vulnerable populations' needs and to provide different mobility options to them when we are developing the evacuation plans. After conducting a review of the current practice, we also conducted a review of the state-of-the-art research. So I just want to provide a quick overview of what the research has been done in the evacuation area and to show what kind of potential tools that are available for you to use. So the areas can be divided into three. So including the behavioral research, planning and operations, and the policies. So in terms of the behavioral research, so what we are done in academia is we're conducting mixed methods, including surveys, interviews, and focus groups to investigate household protective action decision-making process. So essentially, we are trying to use those data to build models to model people's evacuation decision, departure time, mode choice, destination choice, route choice, etc. So the fundamental research questions under this area is to understand how different types of factors, especially people's psychological factors, risk perceptions, how are they impacting people's decision making. As you can imagine, so the research in those areas are mainly theory focused to enhance our understanding of the process. The second area of research is the planning and operations. So most work has been done in this area is to use optimization models to develop transit-based evacuation plans, including resource allocation, pickup location planning, ride-sharing planning, routing, and scheduling planning as well. So, however, for those areas of the research, a fundamental limitation of this research is they have limited connections to human behavior when they are developing those optimization models, and most of those models are relying on very simplistic assumptions about the process, which kind of limited their real-world applications. In the end, we also have research, some of the research has been done in terms of policies. So some frameworks and templates have been developed for communities to evaluate emergency preparedness and evacuations with a goal of promoting social equity and provide policy recommendations. So, however, those kind of work are only staying at the very high level of the analysis, so conceptual level, I would say. So there's no adoption of the behavioral research findings or the operations models into those kind of more larger plans or templates or tools that can be readily used for the community. So essentially, there's lots of research to practice kind of work that to enhance our research findings to put them into use for policymaking. So in addition to all those existing research has been done, and there are several other major challenges that of the current research I want to point out. So essentially, I think there's a lack of research in the role of transit for wildfire evacuations. So a lot of work has been done for hurricane evacuations and some of the work focusing on transit-based evacuation for hurricanes. But we all know hurricanes are different from wildfires. Wildfire fires usually have shorter lead time, have environmental cues, and usually happen very quickly. So how we can use transit in wildfire evacuations is still of very limited understanding in academia. So we also have limited understanding of vulnerable populations' needs, especially during wildfire evacuations, and there's just not enough work on leveraging emerging data sources and the technologies in AI and data science to help us develop better tools and models to enhance our decision making. And like I just mentioned, we also need more technology transfer and adoption. So based on the challenges and the gaps we just identified, so we also pointed out 4 areas that need more research in the future. So first, we need to increase research in transit-based evacuations to help us understand how people are using transit, what's their perceptions and needs and attitudes. And we also need to incorporate those kind of information into our optimization models to develop more realistic transit-based evacuation plans, scheduling, routing, stop plans, things like that. And in the end, we want to transfer this into tools that can be used by many communities around the country. We also need to enhance our understanding of vulnerable population needs, like I just mentioned, especially for different kinds of vulnerable population groups. They all require different kinds of assistance, and we need to incorporate those kind of elements when we are developing those plans and models. And next thing we need to do is we need to utilize new data sources and technologies. So in our lab, we are currently using GPS data, people's movement data to capture people's decision-making process into in a wildfire scenarios. And then we are using such data to develop accurate AI models that can help us forecast, for example, travel demand in wildfire evacuations on an hourly basis for the next day or for the next week. So those kind of more accurate and powerful tools should be adopted and transferred into useful tools that can enhance the practice in the future. So I will conclude my talk over here. Thank you all for your attention. So here is my contact information. If you are interested in our research or have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zhao, for a very informative presentation, and also thank you to Mark. And we do have a question. Whoops, let's see, it disappeared. Let me go. What are some of the best practices, so this is for Mark, in cybersecurity that agencies should be doing but aren't?
Yeah, look, I think one of the fundamental basics are train your staff on phishing, PHISHING. It's one of the most notorious and infamous ways for a cyber attack to enter the organization. But train your staff on being aware and mindful, so they're not tricked into clicking or participating in a phishing scam. Secondly, multi-factor authentication can go a long way in deterring access to passcodes or entrance into the organization's IT infrastructure, as well as IT applications. I think those two fundamental are, I would say, the primary. And again, going back, have a plan, have a resilience plan. What happens if you're under attack? How do you recover? It's the same thing Julie said, just in a different application. Be prepared, understand it, because recovery is the expense. Being attacked is one thing, but the recovery and the disruption to your organization operations where the true expense comes in.
Thank you. Let's see if we have another question. I just wanted to also acknowledge, there's another question. For Dr. Zhao, you started off the presentation with discussions of hurricane evacuations. How is transit evacuation different? Let's see. Let's see. Chad, can you read that off? It disappeared.
Absolutely, yes. So, Dr. Zhao, you started off with the presentation with discussions of hurricane evacuations, and then you talked about wildfire evacuations. How are those two different contexts similar and different?
Thank you for the question, Chad. So this is a great question. So for hurricane evacuation, I think the fundamental difference from a hurricane evacuation and a wildfire evacuation, in my opinion, is twofold. The first fold is for a wildfire case, usually we will have environmental cues. So we can see the fire, we can see the smoke, so we can hear the sound. So those kind of environmental cues are triggering people's behavior very quickly. In contrast, for hurricane, in most cases, we only have something called social cues. Social cues is the emergency messages and all different kinds of communication message coming from different channels, like telling you that hurricane is coming, but you really don't see any rains or tornadoes until the hurricane appear to the landfall. So that's kind of two fundamental differences from these two types of disasters. So which lead to the second difference, which is for hurricanes, usually we will know a hurricane is coming in at least 5 days or 6 days ahead. And then some of the counties, for example, for the recent event, Hurricane Ian, some of the counties, they are calling evacuations 3 days before the event. So for a community with 3 days ahead, you will have plenty of time. I wouldn't say plenty, but you will have more time to prepare and to set up your stuff, and you do the transit-based evacuation and to coordinate those people better because you have just more lead time. However, for wildfire case, sometimes it's happening just so quickly. For example, like the Marshall Fire, which happened early, I think on the New Year's this year in Colorado. So the fire happened just in a few hours, and then it spread very, very quickly. people have to evacuate within just 4 hours or 6 hours. For in those kind of situations, you don't really have much time to coordinate your transit operations if you don't have a plan in place already. So this is something that's very pressing right now, for especially for the counties and municipalities in California and the entire West Coast. You need to have a plan in place ahead, and you need to trigger these plans very quickly as soon as you figure out, it's a goal, it's an evacuation decision is issued to the entire population over there. We should have the plan ready to have people ready to evacuate. So I think that's kind of in my opinion, the differences and the similarities from the two different types of disasters. But definitely, because for hurricanes, we have more experiences, we have more events in the past, we have a lot of lessons learned. So for a lot of counties in California, there are some good examples on the East Coast that you can learn to develop your plans, but you need to also keep in mind that you need to have some adaptations because the two disasters are very different from each other. Thank you for the question. You are on mute, Stuart.
Still on mute.
I'm on mute. I'm sorry. This question is for both of you. What role should the federal government take in transit resiliency in your respective areas? And we'll start with Mark, and then we'll go to Dr. Zhao.
Well, one, I think the federal government is starting to send down directives, or starting to specify directives in critical infrastructure. And I think to the extent that those are harmonized, many of our clients are leery of reporting that may come. If that reporting is standardized and quite frankly of benefit to both the federal government as well as the agency, that's critically important. Second is funding. There are many agencies that simply don't have the funds available to do more work, even if it is something that is truly risk mitigation to their operations. So I think to the extent that they can sort of harmonize the direction and allow agencies to report in a fairly consistent and efficient manner, but at the same time also provide funding that can either go to training and/or direct funding to third party to help agencies through this topic, which isn't intuitive.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead, Dr. Zhao.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark and Stuart. So I completely agree with what Mark just said, especially for the standardization. I know, especially for the wildfire case, so NIST is developing different kinds of standards right now for wildfire, structure, the fire safety for the structures in California, and also they are trying to develop some standards to guide the wildfire evacuations on the West Coast as well. So those kind of things should be developed, I think, more quickly and more comprehensively to cover a lot of geographical areas to provide those kind of guidance to especially the small municipalities who really don't have the manpower and the resources to develop those on their own. So our general guidance, with those details will be very helpful for them. Another thing I want to add to what Mark just said is the coordination. So we know a lot of areas, especially small areas, they maybe only have a few paratransit vehicles. So how can they rely on just a few paratransit vehicles in emergencies? So a lot of coordinations have to be happening during wildfire evacuations. I think those kind of leadership, those kind of coordination should happen at least at the state level and also federal level to help coordinate different kinds of areas to conduct a successful wildfire evacuation on the West Coast. So that's two things.
Thank you, Dr. Zhao. And we have time for one question. Let's see. And this is for both. If there's one message you'd like to give out to our audience about cyber and wildfire evacuation resilience, what would it be? And I'll turn it back to Mark.
Sure. Approach cyber risk like any other organizational risk that you manage today, whether it's health and work and safety, physical safety, asset safety, treat it like every other organizational risk, and elevate it to the management team, to those responsible for the overall organization in that fashion.
So my message for all the transit agencies out there for that trying to prepare for wildfire evacuations in the future, I think the most important thing is you need to have a plan ready. So that's very, very important. As we can see, a lot of communities in California don't even have a plan yet. So have a plan, develop a plan, and know where are the people you need to help ahead, and have those plans developed to support their needs in real time. So that's very, very important. And new technologies, like I mentioned, those big data, AI technologies, and also working with, even private partners in this situation would be helpful for you to have a successful, a safe wildfire evacuation in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you. This concludes our presentation on transit resiliency. I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers. I certainly learned something, and I want to thank our audience for some really excellent questions. And thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Mark. We are going to go on to a half-hour break right now. Again, thank you so much, everybody. We are just at time. So this is our final session for today about public health resilience and transit. So thank you all for joining us. And today in this session, we have our organizers, myself, Chad Riding, Andrew Furillo, who's now actually with Caltrans. So this we need to update that. We have Andrew Kroom, Senior Research Associate at Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. We have Jody Godfrey, a Senior Research Associate, Center for Urban Transportation Research at University of South Florida, so that commonly known as Cutter. And we have Linda Hill, the Assistant Dean, Herbert Wertheim School of Public Health, UC San Diego. So thank you very much for joining us. So this session, as I said, focuses on public health and transit. We're going to talk about research and practice opportunities, public health and public trust, safety perception and reality, and worker health factors and solutions. So, the awareness of the environmental and financial and health benefits of public transportation is at an all-time high. Since the pandemic was declared on March 11th, 2020, we've all become mini experts in virus transmission, it seems like at times. And so anytime you get people together in a confined space, we are much more aware than previously on how any kinds of viruses or bacterial can spread. And so we've really seen an increase in public funding for transit, and particularly in these areas of public health. And so one of the questions that we've really been asking ourselves is, why is the demand still low in transit, and where can we make the biggest impact for good? So how can we improve transit ridership and make them the best of our limited funding? So, there are lots of measures of transit effectiveness and in terms of safety and how that impacts transit. I was wondering, Andrew, if you could kind of take us through the linkages between safety, service, and value.
Sure, thanks, Chad. I think we'll be focusing a lot on some of the research and practices that we are learning right now and in recent years, and focusing on how to make sure ensure safe operations so that our riders and the public feel and know that they are safe, including our operators. And so a lot of things do start with those people, drivers, if you will, when I say operators, but operators also, our personnel at large. that are supporting. It can be security personnel in and around our transit operations. When we can ensure that they are safe, then they are able to do their job at serving the public consistently. We can provide the support service they need. And then that helps our riders and the public to see the value, both tangible in, being able to make on time commitments with their lives, and then intangible as well, which is helping to reduce our carbon footprints by using transit, by also recognizing that they're reducing traffic and helping us all get together to the right places we need to be at the right time. So as we focus on safety and health of both the public we serve and the operations that we manage, I think we recognize that they can serve the other areas of our goals in transit effectiveness.
Great, and I like how you said you bring that together, the safety, the service, and the values. People start to realize how important transit is, and then they can recognize that the flexible options that they have, and that they're really putting our safety in the fore. And so, kind of we notice a lot of discussion about these topics of safety of the operators, the rider, and the other road users, and how they kind of work together. I was wondering if Jody, you could kind of elaborate a little bit on these three system components.
Sure. I mean, so in terms of safety, it's obviously safety for the operator is a bit different because there's a little more control. Safety for the riders brings in different aspects, and then other road users, obviously. I think when we're talking safety, though, I think we as generally tend to kind of combine safety and security together in one. And so I think that's one distinction that likely should be brought up, is that security really drives a lot of our decisions, right? In terms of safety, transit is very safe because the vehicles typically are much larger than a personal vehicle, and so a collision safety is typically not so much the worry when it comes to operators and riders, and it's definitely more of the security factor from my perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. It's it's in a bus, you have people around you. There's cameras. As we'll learn later, it's not a guarantee of your physical safety in the vehicle, but you definitely have a lot of advantages over other modes of transportation that make it one of the safest modes around.
And may I can add some comment to that quickly as you introduce
Please do, Andrew.
these
Yes.
other topics. Yeah, on with regard to kind of the vehicle motion, which is a lot of focus I go into in research. Besides supporting this, if we have the security that Jody introduces correctly to safety, if the bus operators or drivers, feel and know they're safe, they're less worried, secure, maybe is a better term to Jody's point. They're less concerned about necessarily watching over their back. If that's the case, then they can focus on the job of getting, from point A to point B consistently. And also what we're exploring out in the industry right now as well, how can we help operators and drivers to perform consistently with less pressure and better information? What technology can we bring, to help them do that, so that the other road users, that are outside of the bus also that's a balance between safety of those passengers and the operators on the bus or within those operations, with the balance of recognizing the very difficult job of navigating, busy urban streets. So that's, I think, kind of ties it all together. Everyone together needs to gain in safety and security, and then everyone does when we provide for each individual component.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned the operator safety, and Linda is an expert in operator safety. Besides besides potential threats, from passengers, which are very rare, Linda, what other health issues do operators face on a regular basis?
So I think health is an important component of safety because we want the operators, whether they're in bus or train or other modalities, to be functioning at their highest level. And so that's where health comes in. And the categories of health issues that can influence the performance include fatigue and drowsiness. And we're doing a study right now looking at how fatigue and drowsiness influence train operators and what the contributing factors are to that fatigue and drowsiness that are either at the operator level or at the employer level. But other issues around performance include impairment. And we know in the United States that there's many types of impairment, and that includes the cognitive impairment associated usually with aging, but also prescription drugs, cannabis and alcohol and other drugs. And to the extent that these influence the driver, those are issues that can be addressed in a number of ways. And then we're, I think, also addressing the issues of worries around sedentary lifestyle. And we can talk about that a little bit more later, but to the extent that sedentary lifestyle is contributing to reduced performance or reduced health in a very highly trained operator, that becomes problematic.
And that's a very good, point that you make about the operators and health and their conditions that they're in, both lifestyle that many of us in rich developed countries have, or just general conditions have a great impact on the operators and then as a result also on the riders. And so some of your research, Andrew, has focused a lot on disease transmission on buses. And so during the pandemic, which depending on how you look at it, we're still in, there's been a lot of talk about better filtration on buses. So could you take us through how that works?
Sure. I thought maybe two practice examples of what we've been learning might introduce the research that we need to do next, which we can go into in following discussion. So I've got one example here that we did research with FTA, supported by the Center for Urban Transportation Research that Ashley Jody is from. So it's been great collaboration. And in this, we were looking to identify how air moves on buses and how we might provide temporary solutions when, let's say, we're in a seasonal virus or situation, or unfortunately, like we've had in the last 2 years, we needed to maybe try some different things depending on what we're learning. And we are learning, I think, and we being, all of our country together, from health experts on through transportation operations, we've been learning together that, there is risks due to airborne in any common spaces. And the better we can ventilate those, the better we can filter those spaces, the better we'll all be operating. And that then turns into the perception of safety and security that we know to be true on transit operations, that we need our public to definitely recognize. So a couple of simple solutions we've learned is we can improve filtration on transit buses. And before you make any changes in this, we're going to recognize you should be speaking to your suppliers and your manufacturers about those changes that could affect motors and systems. But we are seeing some great work being done, increasing filtration that is effective. We can provide short-term, ventilation solutions on the buses with the way we use the air systems. And there are buses that can be ordered with additional fresh air, options in them. So these are things we're practically, learned from that example. Another example in the next slide, Chad. is, regarding the security, we see and know that fortunately attacks on bus operators and drivers is rare, but this is an area that we've seen doing some more and new tracking at the federal level on those attacks to make sure that we understand the level that needs to be reported, because we do have research showing that non-fatal assaults can be routine and often unreported. So that's improving. Thankfully, great work that FTA is leading. And then, was training on de-escalation that is being done that can improve the outcomes for everyone. But in addition, we do recognize that there are places and times and locations where barriers can be a solution for healthier, happier drivers, which then leads to, the feeling of security for both sides when operation drivers know that. And then that can lead to clearer operations, as I said, on the road, safer streets. So there's two examples of things we've been learning in recent years.
Yeah, I think I really like how you note as a solution the de-escalation training and how important that is for public safety officials and people who are kind of on the front line, is knowing, the strategies that help diffuse a situation, that we can be in a better, that we can avoid those assaults from happening and try to maintain the peace as much as possible.
Right.
So very, very good and interesting examples. Kind of leading from the research to the practice realm, there's a lot of opportunities for us to kind of wed research and practice and make these kind of improvements that are so critical to improving the state of transit in the United States. Now, you're actually doing some research, Andrew, about bus operator barriers.
That's correct.
So,
Yeah, here's an example for you to get involved. If you actually take your camera and then scan this QR code, you can go straight to the survey that we have on bus operator barriers. We've just come out of a time where there were a lot of temporary barriers being installed. There has been some great work done even previous to the pandemic on some permanent barriers. And we're actually trying to collect requirements and examples of those barriers so we can all learn from them at this time and provide recognize better requirements for how the barriers should be designed, how strong should they be, what transparency should they have, especially if we start thinking about safety, security barriers that might be installed for the life of the bus eventually. So we're trying to collect that information. We appreciate any help you can provide to get involved and take that survey.
yes. Thanks very much. I'd like to say I did my camera on the QR code and it popped right up there. I hadn't seen a dinosaur in a code like that before, so that's kind of neat.
Who doesn't like a baby T-Rex?
Exactly, yes. And we worked with our partners at the California Transit Association to spread the word here in California. So please feel free to spread that along. It's for a TCRP research that we're really interested in finding results about.
Yes, thank you.
So Jody, you worked really hard at Cutter to look at some of the research that's out there and see where some of these gaps might be. So we know a lot about safety on buses, particularly in the area of assaults. What kind of research questions would you see needs to be out there, and what do you have currently that has helped too? Oh, it looks like you're still.
If someone doesn't unmute themselves, then it's not a good webinar, right? So I'll start by saying that most of the research that I've conducted it's typically related to various aspects of transit safety and then also workforce development. And they might sound unrelated, but they're actually very related, truly. So specifically, I've worked on the intersection of transportation and public health, conducted studies that examined passenger assaults on bus transit systems, for instance, or variations in transit safety risk based on exposure rates by the type of person that you are. We've done some de-escalation training development for different transit agencies around the state of Florida. I've also worked in conjunction with the Florida Mental Health Institute to find out more about that intersectionality of mental health and transit safety, because we often notice, specifically in reference to assaults, that it's not a transit agency problem, but rather it's community challenges that spill into the transit that's being provided in these communities, right? So in other words, transit isn't like a conduit that are going to make non-violent people act violently, but rather violence is the result of like the mental health crisis that plagues many of our communities. And ultimately, this isn't a challenge that we're going to be able to solve on our own, right? This is a challenge that we're going to have to rely on many others to come up with. Some of the research questions that I think of that still need to be answered are questions, you know, like where are the assaults worst, and what are the characteristics of those communities? Are there, you know, temporal, spatial, and social factors that influence these assault patterns that we could maybe learn from? You know, earlier, Andrew mentioned that a lot of these types of assaults, if they're not as severe, they go unreported. And so are some of these harassment or verbal assaults like a clear indicator of likelihood of a physical assault in the future? Or how can we go beyond protecting just employees to focus on preventing assaults on all stakeholders, which makes the problem, you know, much more complicated and compounded. And then, you know, some places have really implemented some great mitigation measures that have been successful, and some have implemented measures that haven't been. And I'd like to know about both of them and the characteristics of both, right? So that we're not falling in the same pitfalls, but we're also learning from best practices that we can from others. Because, you know, in transit, everybody is like the case, right? The copy and steal everything. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We should be stealing all of the successes from our neighbors. So I'll pause there and let some others.
I'd just like to say, I want to highlight the importance of workforce development in this. About 10 years ago, I was on a bus commuting home from work, and it was one of those long distance commuter buses, about 45 minutes. And I know I was threatened on a bus, and someone wanted to assault me. But fortunately, the bus driver had been trained on de-escalation techniques. And so I mostly stayed silent during the incident. But the bus driver evicted this person from the bus. I believe alcohol was most likely involved. And so definitely, you know, getting this bus rider assault issue settled is very, very important and critical for us to maintain a healthy environment. People don't want to act, or people don't want to ride a transit bus or a train if they think they're going to be in danger. Now, as many of you know, we recently had the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. It's turning 1 year old in a couple weeks, and that provided a lot of new funding for transit. And so I was wondering, Jody, if you could maybe go into a little bit how the, we call it IJA here in California. Some people also call it the Bipartisan Infrastructure Legislation or bill. Whatever name you call it by, it's a tremendous investment in our future of transit and rail. So I was wondering if maybe you could go into that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. I know in Florida, maybe we just really like our acronyms. We call it the IIJA. That's what everybody calls it. If you call it anything else, sometimes they'll jump in with the BIL, but it's usually the IIJA. But anyways, I have a safety agenda. I admittedly have a safety agenda always. So I examine kind of every challenge that I face through a safety lens, and I try to find the opportunities to improve safety anywhere. And I was really delighted to see the added requirement to develop and add to their agency safety plan a risk reduction program for transit operations to improve safety by reducing the number and rates of accidents, injuries, and assaults on transit workers. And this is based on data submitted to the National Transit Database, the NTD. I think many agencies have this new funding availability along with the new requirements which allows for targeted approaches, which are really necessary in this industry because even with the new funding from IIJA, that's still limited, right? Especially as the cost of everything is increasing. And so we really have to make sure that we are investing those limited investments in the ways that they're going to make the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, in improving safety.
Absolutely, yeah, and having that funding from IIJA bill will be critical in achieving those safety goals. So, and kind of what we've touched on here is the intersection between public health and public trust, meaning that in order for people to take public health measures seriously, they need to have the public trust. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely showed us that public trust is critical, and it's also taught us some ways that we can develop and maintain that. And so I was wondering, some of these, how can transit improve public safety? Wanted to turn this over to the group. What kind of ideas do you have? What kind of things do you have from the data?
Sure. So I'll just jump in real quick and say, everyone hears about the 3 E's, right? The engineering, education, and enforcement. And that's kind of like the best approach, right? You engineer everything out that you can, you educate and enforce where you can't engineer out the problem. But I think we also need to remember those 3 C's because, again, we cannot do this alone. So coordination, communication, and cooperation is really going to help us get through some of these challenges related to transit and public health. We need to just recognize that we need help. So I'll let Linda and Andrew kind of jump in with their tidbits of information.
Well, I agree with you completely. And I think that from the public health point of view, if we use the pandemic as the example, that what's been happening in the community and what's been happening in the medical field with contributing to reduce infection rates with vaccination and mask recommendations based on the evidence and the ability to educate the community, because there's 2 sides to safety and disease transmission and public transportation, and certainly the passenger has a role. And if we bring a passenger who's knows not to travel when they're sick and knows how to protect the public by masking and getting vaccinated, then that contributes from a global public health way to the safety of public transit.
I don't think I can improve much on that. That's both excellent points. And I think what we hear and see, we want to spread is a layered approach. And I think that kind of came out of, we see that often in safety in general and security, redundancy and redundancies inside of a particular design, whether you're talking about a vehicle, redundancy in education, redundancy in getting the messages out repeatedly. Redundancy is so useful. I appreciate that point, Jody, and the communication as an example about the pandemic that Linda makes. I think that's where we see some of the common sense things that we often were told. We need to be reminded again, though. Stay home when you're sick. So, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, that trust, and then making that connection between the safety perception and the reality of what we experience on the ground is critical. Is that people perceive those risks and then trust the public health measures to keep them safe. And so, kind of wanted to turn to that, how we deal with transit and how we perceive auto modes are very different. And so how do we kind of take that? I believe you were key in this research area, Linda. So why are these perceptions different on transit versus auto?
Well, we've mostly been looking at the issues around auto safety but some of them are generalizable to transit. And the issues that come up in auto safety around the driver, such as impairment, distraction, speeding, and those are things that have been better regulated in transit, and that because commercial drivers have supervision and education around those issues, that from a performance point of view, you're going to have less of those issues related to the safety factors. But I'd be interested to hear what others think about those as well. And I know that you can also address, of course, the engineering issues around the size of vehicles and so on.
Yeah, if I'll just jump in on some of that, I think to most of us, again, like I mentioned, safety and security is pretty much the same thing. But if you think about, let's say, getting in your car and driving, that your risk might be a collision, let's say with another vehicle or with a bus, right? But if you think about getting on the bus, you're not really thinking about the bus crashing. Typically you're thinking about security factors, right? About the other people that you're going to be exposed to, kind of thing. And the NTD also, reveals that you're much less likely to be involved in a collision in a bus, right, than you are in a personal vehicle. And then it's really important also to take into account that perceptions drive your decision making, right? And so just a side note, I recently conducted a survey of over 2,000 Floridians on their transit perceptions. And I found it really interesting that those that have never ridden transit think of transit as less safe or less secure than those that have ridden transit, right? And so there's this perception out there that transit isn't safe. However, that perception is mostly internalized by people that have never actually been on transit to determine whether or not they feel like it's safe. So I think this is a real opportunity for transit to change the way that people think about transit, to change the media exposure on transit, right? We also have to know that media is looking for clicks, right? And so obviously what click sells, and that's what media is gonna put out there. And transit running on time, safely, securely, with nothing going wrong is not gonna get clicks on a news channel article. However, if you look at that bottom picture that was from one of the heart operators that was stabbed to death, that got a lot of media attention, right? And so you have to really make sure that we can find some way of getting the positive spin out there, as well as to combat some of those negative spins that are already being told, right? Because the clicks are already being out there. So we know it's a great feat, but I feel like there's really ways that we could promote some of the great aspects of transit, and how much transit is doing to protect not only the operators, but their riders, to try to encourage more people into transit.
Absolutely. And one of the things too, you mentioned a terribly tragic event of the fatal stabbing of the transit operator. We wanted to focus a little bit more on our worker health factors and solutions, because I mean, ultimately the people that perhaps have some of the most impact on transit safety are the bus operators. So this is, I believe, an area where Linda is a pioneer, or maybe not pioneer, but a leading expert in this field. So I was wondering, Linda, if you can maybe take us through some of this.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but just to bring up some of the issues that may be particularly important for the transit worker. And I can just quickly go through these. If we start with the next slide, which addresses the issue around sedentary lifestyle, and say some people are calling sedentariness, the new smoking. And if you click through this, what seems to be showing up is that the more sitting that we do and the longer that sitting, so it's the amount of sitting each day as well as the amount of sitting bouts, are contributing to all-cause mortality. So when we talk about resilience in our transit workers, I think we have to also look at how we're supporting their health and a healthy lifestyle. And the data is pretty clear. The transit workers, I certainly can't, say that they're the only ones in the United States that have this problem, because we know that sedentary lifestyle is a big factor for everybody, and that we're all doing too much sitting. But then if we look specifically at some of the, go on to the next slide. So this is just to say that if you're a weekend warrior, but you've spent your whole day sitting 5 days a week, that still has health consequences. And interestingly enough, physical inactivity was also associated with worse COVID-19 outcomes. And when you looked at those individuals who were completely sedentary or even partially sedentary, which was unfortunately the majority of people, that they had 2 to 2.5 times the risk of hospitalization and death compared to those meeting activity recommendations. So going on to the next slide. What does that mean for our transit workers? And especially if we look at bus drivers who have been shown to sit for 12 hours, which is 3 hours longer than your average office worker who's already sitting for a very long time. And one of the things that we know about, and if you go on to the next slide, that in addition to sedentariness, we have an issue around fatigue in our transit workers, and in general in our commercial vehicle drivers, including railroad. And as I mentioned, this is something that we're looking at with all of our railroad workers, thanks to collaboration with Metrolink and Caltrans. And so we're looking at the second issue that I just wanted to briefly touch on, which is fatigue. And fatigue is related, it can definitely influence performance, resulting in a feeling of weariness, tiredness, lack of energy, and slowing reaction time, attention, concentration, and so on. So it can result from something, obviously from not having enough sleep, but it can also result from having shift work, even if you're getting enough sleep, and also from the amount of cognitive burden in the job. So going on to the next slide. When they looked at sleep debt in commercial drivers, unfortunately, and some of this is generalizable to all commercial drivers, this was really common. And having chronic insufficient sleep, less than 7 hours a day, results in something called sleep debt. And with sleep debt, either because people aren't fitting enough sleep into their schedule, or that they have medical issues such as insomnia. So going on to the next slide, and we talked about this, that the consequences are underperformance and increased crash rates. And specifically in those commercial drivers who don't like shift work, that they had even poor health and higher stress related to that. And then the other consequence of fatigue is that it can have health outcomes like hypertension and higher BMI. Next slide. So this is maybe stating the obvious, but one of the preventions of fatigue is getting enough sleep, and also watching for illnesses that can contribute to sleep, like insomnia and sleep apnea. But on the employer side, making sure that schedules are such that people have enough time to get sleep, that they're not, if they're working double shifts, that they then have some time off, and also looking at the issue of cognitive load. So moving on. we know that there are temporary countermeasures to fatigue, such as taking caffeine, napping, and having activity breaks, but those don't substitute for long for just getting enough sleep. And then moving on, we talked about COVID-19 prevention. I think we've covered this pretty well, but just looking at some of the data, there were higher mortality rates in transportation workers than there were in the general public just as a result of exposure. So I think looking at the public health measures that we can take as well as the engineering solutions is crucial. And then I think lastly, we can keep going. And then lastly, just talking about impairment, we're looking at what we can do to earlier identify cognitive impairment, reducing prescription drug overuse, making sure everybody understands the risk of alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs with commercial drivers. We're working with Federal Motor Carriers Service Administration on this and working with commercial drivers across the nation and hoping to have generalizable information on this. And hopefully the last slide. Yes.
Yes, thank you all for your insights into this presentation. We have the contacts for Andrew Kroom, Jody Godfrey, and Linda Hill up there. Thank you again for speaking. I think we have time for just one more question. So I think, there we go. Yes, so I think if we could go around in the 5 minutes we have left, what would you say is the one from each of your respective areas, assaults, ventilation, and operator health? What is the one thing that you would say that everybody should, that one tip, one hack, whatever you'd call it, that you would wish were adopted to help transit safety in those areas?
Okay, I can easily start with that one. If I only get one, I'm going to say de-escalation training, because I feel like we could make the most good with it. And I think we're going to have the least amount of pushback, right? I think if I were to say barriers, that I'd have too much pushback. So I think I'd have to go with training.
Interesting. I would agree. De-escalation is extremely important. How about Andrew?
It's hard to disagree with Jody. I think, that from the probably the best, broadest impact, I think escalation is there, because even in cases where we're studying barriers and how to make sure when and if we build them well, and that they do their job and they support many different areas of ADA, emergency egress, security, the operation, and so on. I think the de-escalation will help, I think, bus drivers, for example, or others, feel equipped to handle many different situations. And then, not just, for example, staying behind a barrier, but, helping basically in the service. So I'll stop there. I'd like to say a second one, but I'll follow your rule, Chad.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, that's definitely building barriers, I think, for disease purposes and also as a safety measure. In addition to de-escalation, that would make a big difference. And then Linda, what would your one measure be?
I think I'd like to address the driver resiliency through promoting well-being. That includes the issues we talked about, such as addressing physical activity, sedentariness. How can we build some of the challenges of being a transit operator? How can we build in measures that will promote their well-being?
Absolutely, yes. Just focusing on well-being of driver or of operators, I think, would be a massive massive win. And I think all three of these contribute to that. So thank you so much for your presentation and participation on this panel. I know I learned a lot, and it was great fun being able to speak to you about this important subject.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chad.
Thanks so much, Chad.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Jody. So that concludes the symposium for today. We have 1 day left, but we'll be talking a lot about, we'll be speaking on transit innovations at the state and local level with some people from Florida joining us. We have something about mobility hubs and multimodal coordination, strategic funding and IJA or BIL, and then improving America's bus stops. So we have some great speakers, really looking forward to it. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me, chad.writing@dot.ca.gov. You can find more at our website. Again, thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.